Good morning from New York. Good very morning to Seattle, the westernmost pillar, as we just established. Good day to Europe, and good evening and good afternoon to Asia and the Pacific. It's probably night there already. I can see the numbers shooting up still. We are at 129, so this is fantastic. Very happy to have everybody around the world connected. We see a lot of familiar faces. So my name is Stefan Schweinfest. I'm the director of the UN Statistics Division, and I have the pleasure of leading you into today's program. This is the first virtual Beyond GDP sprint for 2023, organized by the United Nations Network of Economic Statisticians. We had a series of sprints last year. The network, some of you will know, was established by our Statistical Commission in 2021. And the network has been tasked with looking into innovative ways of bringing the whole field of economic statistics together globally and at the national levels and moving it forward. And one way of doing this is looking today at the topic of Beyond GDP with a particular focus on the social dimension. And we have a fantastic program, and I'll say a few words about that in a minute. So we are building the concept. Let me say a few words about the concept of the sprints. This network has been using the sprints as a very agile methodology to be in touch with each other, to talk to each other, to have a quick following sequence of events virtually on the same topic. And that will happen again with the GDP and Beyond Sprint 2023. So stay tuned. I think we found that a very good methodology, especially for fast evolving and emerging socioeconomic and environmental topics. So please stay tuned. There will be quite a number of GDP and Beyond Sprint meetings in 2023 in the coming weeks. So, and we are still putting the program for the coming weeks together. And as my old director always said, no good deed goes unpunished. So if you are showing interest in these topics and you are in touch with us, don't be surprised if you get a phone call or if you are contacted, and we will ask you to perhaps be a contributor or participant and presenter for one of the future meetings that we will organize. Now, looking back a little bit, putting this all in a bit in a perspective, today we are building on basically three pillars here. We have a paper, the so-called research prospectus. The full title is a research prospectus for an integrated statistical framework for inclusive and sustainable well-being. This was presented as a background document to the recent Statistical Commission session under the item, the report of the network. So this was in March this year when we had the discussions of the Statistical Commission, and the Commission had requested the network to explore the research agenda for a new integrated statistical framework for measuring inclusive and sustainable well-being. So that is described in this document. If you want to reference it, please look for it. The second pillar is the Statistical Commission. The same session also established the Friends of the Chair group on social and demographic statistics, and we will hear a little bit more about that. So that's a mechanism, that is the mechanism that led actually also to the network, because we did a Friends of the Chair review of economic statistics in 2019 and 20. And now we have the network as a mechanism to follow up in the sphere of economic statistics, but we don't want to only stare at economic statistics. We want to in particular look at the connections to the social and also the environmental universe. So the Friends of the Chair for Social Statistics has just been established, has just kicked off work. And as I said, we will hearing more. It will be active over the next 2 to 3 years, looking at the whole panorama of social statistics, developing proposals of how to take this forward. What are issues of methodological work? How can we better work together globally? That's a topic that as a UN Statistics Division is always on our mind. And then, of course, in the background of all of this, you know that the hardcore national accountants on the call, we have the update of the 2008 SNA, which is heading for a 2025 SNA. This is the plan for the Statistical Commission in 2 years to adopt the new framework. But that will also not only look at the core issues of national accounting and economic statistics, it is also having chapters and looking at the connection, at the measuring of well-being and sustainability, and the issues that will be included to go into that direction for the SNA review are distribution of household income, consumption wealth, unpaid household service work, labor, human capital and education, and indicators of healthcare, and so on and so forth. So there is a lot in our traditional national accounting system that already opens the door to connect with the social universe. Behind all this, there is also a political context, moving a little bit away from the Statistical Commission and our statistical and measuring and data community. There's the policy context. Actually, quite recently, it was just a few days ago, our United Nations Secretary General published a so-called policy brief on valuing what counts, a framework to progress beyond gross domestic product. So that comes from the so-called Our Common Agenda of our Secretary General that looks at the future and will lead to an event that at the United Nations we are looking forward to in 2024. We will have a summit of the future, and the Secretary General had already last year or the year before proposed to look also at the issue of going beyond GDP to measure dimensions such as progress, well-being, and sustainability. So there is a high-level policy demand because at the policy level it has been clearly recognized that the sole focus on GDP is not sufficient to capture all of the important dimensions of people and planet, as we always say here. So that policy brief will be officially launched on the 5th of June. So today is June already, so in 5 days, and then there will be a discussion, and there is a proposal to create a mechanism to develop further work on measuring beyond GDP. This will have to be taken up by the SDG summit in September. So we will see exactly what kind of form and shape this will take. But as many of us, statisticians, and you have already been part of this discussion, I think we can be very assured this will build on our technical work. And so what I'm saying is we have here a very unique opportunity to pull all kinds of strings together, the economic methodological work, the social dimension that is being looked at, and develop the policy dimension that is asking for new measures. So this is all the stars are aligned in one word. That's what I'm trying to say here. So I'm really happy that we're having this sprint today, this opportunity, and I have to thank a few people, of course, to make this happen. There's always hard work in the background, in particular the UK Office of National Statistics, UK ONS, who has worked very, very hard as one of with the co-chairs of the network, namely Statistics Canada, Maldives Bureau of Statistics, Statistics Netherlands, and the US Bureau of Economic Analysis, and of course our own staff. You will see a lot of UN Statistics Division at the beginning of this. And there have been a lot of brainstorming sessions in the background to put this all together. So thank you very much. And our fundamental principle is always we want to add value and we don't want to step on anybody's feet, and we don't want to overlap. So I think this first sprint session will have the main purpose of actually showing the entire panorama where we are right now, and we have a number of really highly recognized international experts to lead us into that. So I'm very much looking forward to this, and I'm very grateful that you connected this morning. Let me say a few words about the agenda before we dive in. We will, in session 2, look at the evolution of social and demographic statistics and its impact on current and future priorities. So we will start with the social angle and have a presentation here on the evolution of social and demographic statistics through the lens of the UN Statistics Commission since 1948. And then the potential scope and purpose of the system of population and social statistics. There is this debate of how do we best integrate all the rich information in the social sphere. And those will be 2 presentations in session 2 to really put down the perspective of the social statistics. Then we will move over a little bit to the economic perspective in session 3. We will look at well-being and sustainability in the 2025 SNA, so a little bit in the perspective of bringing all of us on the same page where these various strings of activities are at this point. And then we will zoom in on a number of important perspectives on Beyond GDP in session 4, where we have the perspective from WHO, the World Health Organization. We're looking at the health dimension. We will be looking at the labor dimension from the ILO perspective, and we will look at the perspective from a regional commission with UN Economic Commission for Africa. So this is the panoramic flight over today's program. I hope you are all ready. So fasten your seatbelt. I'm just checking the numbers again because now we are at 172. This is fantastic. And without further ado, we go from the opening into the next session, which is looking at the social perspective. You're still not entirely rid of me because I am chairing the session, but it's easy because the first thing I have to do is to give the floor to my dear colleague, Francesca Groom, who is the Chief of Demographic and Social Statistics Statistics branch in my own division here at the UN, and who is well positioned to give us an overview where we as UN Statistics Division at the center and the global level stand at this moment in time with our social and statistics program. So floor is yours. Over to you, Francesca.
Thank you so much, Stefan, and greetings to everyone. As I mentioned, I have a very small screen, so I'm only seeing my presentation. I lose you, so give me a sign if I'm talking too much or if there are any other issues. I assume that you can see my PowerPoint? Yes, okay, good. So indeed, I'm going to talk a little bit about the discussions and decisions taken at the UN Statistical Commission over more than 70 years. Discussions and decisions related to the improvement of social and demographic statistics and the measurement of people well-being in all its forms and dimensions. So why did we decided to look at the past? And again, it's a quite ambitious and quite long horizon that I'm reviewing. It's for many reasons. First of all, it's important to recall and take stock of the many initiatives in the past to conceptualize, to put together the different dimensions within social and demographic statistics. So to clean up a little bit this quite fragmented and diverse pillar, but also, as Stefan mentioned, there's been a few attempts to integrate better the social and demographic statistics also with other pillars, in particular with economic statistics. So it's important to learn from the past, as today and in the next sprints and the next months, we will discuss as a group on the directions that we want to promote. It's also a way for us to reflect and take stock on the evolution of the social concerns, and I'll highlight these changes over time, and also how the terminologies has evolved as we moved from the 50s to today. So, but let's begin and let's see where I take you. Don't get scared. Again, it's more than 70 years of discussions, decisions at the Commission, so there is a lot to discuss. I'm not going to zoom in each and every initiative. And but just to give you a sense, I'll start with the first attempt to measure levels of living in 1954, and I'll bring you up to today, 2023, where we are working with a new group of experts called the Friends of the Chair Group on Social and Demographic Statistics that, as Stefan just mentioned, was just established to review this important pillar, social and demographic statistics, and come up with a set of recommendations to ensure that we are producing what our major users are demanding from us. So again, this is just a slice of the story, mainly looking at initiatives that attempted to better organize, better conceptualize this vast field of statistics, social and demographic, and also looking at how the different attempts try to better link social and demographic to economic statistics. And again, only from the lens, only from the discussions at the UN Statistical Commission. There is so much more out there, but it will not be covered by this presentation. Let's move to my first initiative that is reviewed. As I said, there was this preliminary groundbreaking report on presenting international definitions and measurement of standards and levels of living that was presented in 1954, that really attempted to provided a way to measure level of living, standards of living to a series of 12 components. That was the first component approach that we see in the history of the Statistical Commission, touching on all aspects of level of living considered at the time. And it should be recognized that much of the following work, both in the direction of developing social indicators, but also in the direction of systematizing, conceptualizing this statistical pillar, actually derive from this first initial report. If we zoom in and look at the type of dimensions or social concerns that were covered in the 50s, we acknowledge that there was an interest on population and health, education, employment or work. There are some more economic dimensions like consumption and savings and social security. We also have some basic needs covered: housing, clothing, food and nutrition. Interesting, we have something on transportation and recreation and entertainment. And importantly, in the 50s, we were already looking at human freedoms. Also, something I want to highlight on the back is that this is the decade of the 50s, and you'll see that I move throughout the time frame on the bottom, jumping from decades to decades. But so in 1956, this is the year when the Commission adopted for the first set of principles and recommendations for population housing censuses. And that, of course, that started the establishment of this program, on censuses. And the Commission also acknowledged these recommendations as a good way to start conceptualizing, organizing, and structuring social and demographic statistics, because the principles were offering a set of tabulations, a set of core topics, but also they were proposing agreed concepts and definitions. So that was really probably the first attempt to conceptualize and providing guidelines to countries on how to structure their social and demographic statistics. I'm then jumping, and you saw it a little bit already, to the 70s, where the system of social and demographic statistics, or SSDS, was proposed with its 11 subsystems. That was really an attempt to establish in the demographic area a framework parallel to the system of national accounts. It was proposed to the Commission by Stone and his partners, and it was really primarily conceived to establish a closer relationship between social and economic statistics. The idea was to link information on stocks and flows of people, of individuals, to the economic information and provision of services. And that was proposed to be achieved through the linking of, or the use of consistently of the same concepts, definitions, and statistical classifications to link each of these subsystems and the other dimensions, as well as, so it requires a linkage at the level of the concepts, but also a linkage at the level of the underlying data. So the system itself was also proposing principle for structuring the data in the back end. It required record level linkages and also the use of longitudinal data sets. So it was quite demanding for the 1970s. If we look a little bit at the social concerns, at the dimensions, at the pillars or the blocks that were identified within these 11 subsystems, again, we recognize population, we recognize health. The wording is slightly different from the 40s, from the 50s. We recognize the education, employment, even though these three are more looked from the side of providing services, because again, the main goal was to link the social dimensions to the economic perspective. We also see interest, of course, in the more economic dimension, income, consumption. There is a social security again, something about housing conditions. We also see interesting the use of time that is coming up already in the 70s. Also interesting to see that there is a full subsystem looking at social class stratification. And another point that I want to highlight is that for the first time, we see an interest on public order and safety, that it's probably the first time where we see some dimensions related to governance and crime statistics. So overall, the system was welcomed, but considered way too complex to be implemented, in particular in developing countries. So this system was actually replaced by a different view, a lighter solution with the framework for social and demographic statistics. We are still in the 70s, so it's just a few years later. And with this framework was considered a lighter solution compared to the full system, because it was only attempting to identify a number of social domains or social concerns. The famous 11, they were called subsystems in the previous page. And for each of these building blocks, the framework was highlighting the key concepts, key definitions, and key statistical classification to be applied to ensure a minimum and light linkages, level of linkages between the different concerns. this work definitely pushed the statistical community to focus much more on agreeing on concepts, on definitions, and on classifications, and also led the statistical community to move away from a system per se in the context of social and demographic statistics, and moving towards a set of social indicators. In fact, in 1978, we have already the first set of guidelines on social indicators. And that brings me to also pointing out that the 70s are critically important for social and demographic statisticians, because it's when the big international programs for household surveys were launched. The first World Fertility Survey was launched, I believe, in 73 or 74. In 1977, the Statistical Commission adopted the National Household Survey Capability Program. So a lot of attention, a lot of emphasis given to the role of surveys, household surveys, to produce the wealth of data needed to respond to data needs in the social and demographic statistics pillar. And the beauty of these multi-purpose type of surveys was that they were already at the individual level, linking the different social concerns through modules, through set of questions. So that was the solution that was proposed in the 70s. But there was this debate at the Statistical Commission, I'm jumping into the 80s, that had started in the 70s with Stone proposal. Do we really go back and try to better conceptualize, organize, systematize, I don't know how to say, the pillar of social and demographic statistics into something that is well organized on the back end, so really proposing a system, or we switch our attention and energy on the front end, I would say. So a list of policy relevant indicators, really responding to user needs. And at that time, the discussion was our users were mainly policymakers, at least from the reports of the Statistical Commission. Of course, today we would look at our academia, civil society organization, and the citizens in general. But at that time, it was all about providing the data needed for government officials and for policymaking. So there was this debate at the Commission, do we go back to better structuring social and demographic statistics and proposing a system and subsystems all were linked, or we focus more on producing the headline indicators. So at that time, the second option, so really looking at user needs as a priority, was the angle promoted by the Commission. But of course, the Commission is very diplomatic, so always looking for a middle ground. The Commission also insisted that we should keep up with promoting better coordination across the many data producers in the social pillar, as well as a better structuring of the underlying data. But there was definitely in the 80s a push to move towards a minimum set of indicators or a core set of indicators. We started producing dedicated handbooks on social indicators. And that brings me to the momentum for the list of indicators. The most known one in the 90s is the minimum national social data set. That was a simple list of 15 indicators that had been developed by experts reporting to the Statistical Commission that adopted the set in response to major United Nations conferences and summits. You may remember that in the 90s, we had in 94 in Cairo, the conference on population and development. There was in Beijing the fourth World Conference on Women. In 95 in Copenhagen, the World Social Summit. So there were a lot of goals and agreements among member states that required a monitoring framework and a set of indicators to assess progress towards those commitments. In terms of dimensions or concerns, we can still recognize that we are in the 90s, a call for monitoring population. There is still a focus, of course, on health. We have different types of mortality that are highlighted. Of course, before, in my previous slide, I was looking at the concern. Now I'm really zooming in into indicators, so they are slightly differently formulated. But so we have population, we have health, we have education, we have work or employment, we have the more economic sides of the story, looking at income, looking at GDP. We also have some proxy to poverty, monetary value of the basket of food. We are looking at some housing conditions and also maybe for the first time what we would call the WASH indicators, access to sanitation and access to safe water. I like to point out that we are in 95 and we are finally looking at family planning with an indicator on contraceptive prevalence rate. And now I enter into the recent history, and I'm trying to go faster because I assume that all of us were working in some format on these topics. So I'm looking at MDGs indicators in 2000, adopted by the Commission in 2002. And the SDGs indicators adopted by the Commission in 2016. So MDGs coming from the Millennium Declaration in terms of goals and numerical and time-bound targets. The indicators 48 coming identified by a group of experts, all building on the previous initiatives that I just described. And then the SDGs framework, much more complex, much more ambitious, again, described in the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. We have 70 goals and 69 targets, and of course the 231 indicators identified by the IEG SDGs, this group of experts established by the Statistical Commission. So in terms of topics, I'm not going to zoom in. We have everything under the MDGs, a little bit less in the economic side, but we have environment that shows up for the first time, a full chapter, a full goal, and we also have a full goal on partnerships, goal 8. And under the SDGs, even more ambitious, and again, this is recent history, so I'm not going to zoom in on that. Everything is covered with the 3 pillars of development, the social, the economic, but also keeping in mind the planet and environmental sustainability, but also looking at good governance, the rule of law, and ensuring equality and sustainability. I wanted to quickly, I'm almost ready to close. I want to point out that between the MDGs and the SDGs in 2003 and 2008, the Commission reopened the discussion of how do we improve social and demographic statistics. And there were 2 expert group meetings that were organized and that reported back to the Commission. And again, the experts acknowledged that actually those are the most recent EGMs on this topic. Acknowledge that having a framework for social and demographic statistics would help countries. So in particular, the group agreed on specific building blocks under the social and demographic domain. They are there on your left. They are a little bit outdated, but that's as of 2008. It's important to notice that the experts also acknowledge the need to look not just to specific social concerns, but also to unpack these issues vis-a-vis of specific population groups, and also at different level, looking at different levels of geography. So for each of these domains, the experts promoted the need to have like a repository where countries can have access to clear concepts and definitions that should be used, the availability of international standards, what are the recommended topics, the recommended tabulations, statistical classifications, and many other metadata type of information, and some guidance on how to produce statistics looking at or using available data sources, administrative records, the censuses, and the surveys. With this, I move to today. We are in 2023, and we have already mentioned a couple of times that a new group is actually looking at these issues, how to improve social and demographic statistics. I'm talking about this new Friends of the Chair group. We are working over the last few months with 10 chief statisticians and their technical teams. The overall goal is really to ensure that social and demographic statistics are fit for purpose. Today, as we continue the implementation and acceleration of all the efforts to achieve the promises under the 2030 agenda, but we also want to start looking ahead and beyond 2030. The group has agreed on 3 work streams so far. We will look at what we are collectively doing in social and demographic statistics, really assessing the work, reviewing the work of the many city groups, expert groups, reporting to the Statistical Commission, to the regional commissions, and also to other intergovernmental bodies that have scope and work on statistics. The second stream is very important, is very much related to the discussion of this morning, is looking at national experiences. So we will look at these 10 countries first. National experiences in producing granular and timely social and demographic statistics, how they construct the data, what is the data system that they put together to ensure that the different data sets, different concerns are integrated as much as possible. We want to identify best practices that can be broadcasted at the global level for other countries to copy. And then, of course, there is also a need to make the case for the value of social and demographic statistics. We feel that over the years, since the beginning of the discussion at the Commission, we have been left behind, and we want to elevate the role of these important sets of data in the eyes of our data users and data producers too. So quickly just mentioning, because you may not know, some of you are now from the social and demographic statistics side, but I kept mentioning the importance of linking the different dimensions by using the same conceptual frameworks, same or harmonized concepts, definitions, statistical classifications. And I just want to reassure you all that we have done so much normative work over the past 70 years, and all these bits and pieces are well connected. And in front of you, you have just a shopping list, and there is so much more. We have recommendations on housing censuses, on civil registration vital statistics systems, on international migration statistics system. You'll hear soon from Rafael all the fantastic work done in the context of work-related statistics through ILO and the International Conference on Labor Statisticians, all sorts of statistical classifications related to social and demographic domains and time use, gender, violence against women, disability, the recent work on recommendations to produce statistics on refugees, internally displaced persons, and even statelessness as of this year, thanks to the work of EGRIS. And again, there is so much more. I don't want to be exhaustive or comprehensive, but I want just to leave you with this idea that in terms of normative work or conceptual work at the global level, there is a lot we can build on as we move forward. So to wrap up, the questions of do we need an overarching framework to better structure, organize social and demographic statistics, or do it or not? or we are happy with what we have. It's still there at the Statistical Commission. We have never really resolved it. What we understand is that at the national level, there is definitely a scope to come up with some assistance and recommendations on how to better integrate the many data sets that countries have available. And we rely on the Friends of the Chair group and the work of the network, of course, to come up with some recommendations along those lines. We also need to be very practical and realize that countries are at different stages. So we always need to keep in mind the needs of developing countries and their statistical systems. And as I just mentioned, a lot of work on normative and conceptual, on the normative and conceptual side at the global level, keeping in mind that social concerns and the related terminology have evolved over time. I'm going to leave you with this nice infographic where you can see that in terms of social domains, social concerns, over time on the bottom, we can consistently see the focus on some key pillars: population, health, education, employment, always been there, and that will always be there with us. And in blue, you see these blue bubbles, you see how the specific concerns or subgroups of population popped up over the years: public order and crime, women, youth, disability, and more recently, water and sanitation, gender, we moved from women to gender, contraception, environment, etc. In light gray, those are the topics that were lost: social classes, clothing. And then in pinkish or light brown, maybe these are the topics that we haven't covered yet: social cohesion, better measurement of trust, and many others. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Francesca, and thank you for this journey, really. I mean, starting in 1954, I think many of us were very little at that time. And thanks also for being brave. I mean, you are talking to the network of economic statisticians, but you are a social statistician. So you led us a little bit through the garden of our neighbors and gave us a better understanding where we are coming from in terms of social and demographic statistics, where we are right now, what are the issues. And interesting, as usual, when you look back, a lot of déjà vu. Some elements easily recognizable, but there are a couple of central themes that are clearly there. Number one is the question of the coverage. What is the domain? What is in there? Or what should be in there? And number two is the fundamental question on the most appropriate format in which all of this rich information could be or should be presented. And I think these are the two themes that will go through our whole morning today. And this leads me directly to Ivo, our next presenter, who will talk a little bit about this proposed system of population and social statistics. Now, Ivo is a known national accountant, so he comes with that perspective and can give us an overview of what was the thinking, or what is the thinking of putting all of that information in a kind of systems approach together. So Ivo, the floor is yours. Ivo, we cannot, you are still muted. We are seeing your slides. Okay, as usual, let me fit in a good piece of news. We are all numbers people and information data people. I'm just keeping the upper right-hand corner of my screen an eye on that, and we are at 202. Yes, Ivo, there you are, visible and audible, and so yes, we can hear you, definitely. I gave you the floor for your presentation. We saw a slide, but it's gone.
Is the slide back up?
Yes, now the slide is back up. We can see you, we can hear you, and we can see the slide. So this is all we need.
Thank
Go
you.
for it.
Thank you, Stefan, and thank you, Francesca, providing this wonderful overview over what happened since the 50s till today. And Stefan, you formulated it right. What we will do in this presentation is more succinctly do a deeper dive on what a system of population and social statistics may look like, taking back it as a view that we may want to revisit the work that was done in the 70s by Stone, who, as you also know, released the 68 SNA system of national accounts, but he worked also very much on the system of what he called social and demographic statistics. And he provided a format of what the domain would be as compared to issues of economic concerns. He wanted to have a very clear understanding that economics is an essential element for the development of countries, as you will, and the world, but also it was very important to understand the welfare orientation, as he called it, and he organized that according to subsystems that needed to be developed. And the interest that he had was very much also in making the link, and here you have it, with the system of, let's say, for the society and the system as you measure the economy. This is the point of departure, as Stefan referred to, of the report that we brought as a network to the Statistical Commission, which was a research perspective on the integrated statistical system for inclusive and sustainable well-being. Now, what it did is said there are already very nice systems developed on the SNA, and one on the economy, and one on the environment called the SEA, the System of Environmental Economic Account, both of which I was privileged to work on. But there are still areas that we may want to, bring more tightly together. Although, as Francesca has indicated, a lot of work has been done in the various sort of subsystems, indicators, components of the population and social statistics. But is there an opportunity to bring that more systematically together in a system and start to think about the format in which we can bring that together? In addition, we indicated that there was an important aspect to be brought forward, which will also be part of this discussion about the series of sprints in 2023 organized by the network, and that's about the central framework. Now, I will not go into that. I will focus this presentation on the system of population and social statistics. And I can be brief because Francesca already articulated it well. It was very much an attempt to actually establish a social demographic statistics domain that complemented the system of national account for economic statistics at that time. Let me indicate in the 70s, there was an extensive discussion, and you can go to the Statistical Commission archives on the UNSD website, on the welfare orientation of the system of national accounts, where a lot, and I will show that later in these slides later on, where there was a whole discussion, what you can now call in a Beyond GDP discussion, but they called it the welfare orientation of the system of national accounts. But in addition, there was an explicit discussion about the social demographic statistics domain in terms of a system. It was indicated by Francesca that system, as it was proposed after probably about 6-7 years of discussion from out of the 60s, it was released in 75, that was considered too complex for the developing world. There was a lot of work being done at the OECD and at the advanced countries that basically were the inspiration for Stone to write that. He worked both at the OECD and at the UN. He was a UN consultant, but he was also an OECD consultant, as he was for the system of national accounts. But it was too overly complex for the developing world to be considered an international standard. So it was really appreciated as it was, but it was not considered appropriate for implementation in the developing world. And therefore they developed a framework. Still, the considerations are the same because there was a a need to understand, let's say, the life cycle of persons in terms of social concerns and well-being concerns, in terms of sequences, like, for instance, the understanding that you get born, you go through learning, you go through earning, and then you retire. And you can see that sequence can be explained in interrelated sort of concept that we will show in one of these slides. In addition, I should mention that the indicator sets were also very much part of the system as it was proposed. And these indicator sets also were very much used later on in the framework, but also in the minimum set of indicators and so on. So in that sense, the framework still is part of a continuous debate on whether there's an indicator approach, whether there is a system approach. And I think it should not be a discussion of either or. I think these things can be tightly brought together in a more comprehensive description, as we call it, in the framing of the domain for social demographic statistics. Just briefly what the system is about, and when we think about the system, how can you articulate it? Basically, it is structured around subsystems. It is a more tightly arrangement of concept definitions and classification and matrices. There's also a much more sort of tighter understanding of presenting this material more in a balanced format, in matrices of stocks and flows, of states of individuals and groups. There's also a much more, as Francesca indicated, that a need to link to the economic system. So you have this demographic sort of development in terms of demographic development. You have the whole discussion around aging, but you want to link that to the provision of social services. So you want to link the individual and its life cycle with social services that are needed in the countries. And there the system of national accounts, of course, captured it, but it doesn't have the detail and granularity that you want to see sometimes in the reflection of that, and we will talk about that. It was very important to indicate by Francesca that time as a unit of measurement was well recognized. So they already talked about the need to understand the unpaid household service work, and therefore they used time budget surveys, as they indicated. There was the advocation of geographical information, the granularity that is of course needed in the provision of social services and social infrastructure to support in terms of education and health, infrastructure and so forth. There was a understanding that if you want to develop data, integrated data collection, you have to work towards the integration of records. So there was the whole exchange issue came about, and the record linkage, and I consider this is the 1970s, and that it was needed to present the material in time series. And that is now being done much more in terms of the indicator sets, but we know that they are sometimes far apart in terms of statistics and indicators as compared to economic statistics. Now, just, I will go through the 11 sort of subsystems, but it was important to indicate that for the developing countries, the 11 subsystems fell back to 6 systems. And in the last slide, Francesca gave away the main sort of areas where there's still a focus, which is around the first element, which is the population. There's an important aspect of distribution. There's an important aspect of housing. There's an important aspect of education, labor and health. So these are the, let's say, the 6 major sort of themes that basically work through it, and that basically also was internationally developed going forward. Now, just to give you a flavor of what a matrix would look like, and this is one of the issues actually that being brought out in the discussion around the system, is it possible to develop matrices more consistently in understanding opening and closing stocks? Now, I will not go into the detail, but here you see an example of which is provided in the Stone Manual about opening and closing stocks. So you see at the bottom the opening stock of an age cycle from the time a person is born, in this case males, from age 0 to age 6, and then on the column side at the right angle you see the closing stocks, and on the left hand side, outside world as it's called, you see the growth recording in terms of newborn and immigrants, and on the top row you see information around death of these children of this age. Now, this integrated presentation is something that we may want to advocate to ensure the overall quality of the stock and flow data. Now, if you look at age, you can, of course, as was indicated in the manual, you can also take the slice and linking age to education. Now, I will not go into detail, but basically what you try to do here is understand the sequencing of birth by age, and then its cycle through education, and then you take a next cycle into earnings, and then the next cycle into retirement. So what you actually see is slicing up the population, and these matrices are not only statistically useful in terms of balancing of information and trying to find the inner sort of side of the matrix, but also very much used for policy use, and they are used in sociodemographic projections. Now, let me give you an example of work that has developed since the 90s and also in the 2000s, which is the national transfer accounts that really start to integrate this detail of population stocks and flows, indicating that the age structure is changing rapidly. As we know, in the developing countries, there are different age distributions as compared to the more developed countries. You see the dividends that can be gained in the developing countries versus the aging that takes place in the advanced countries. But apart from the fact that age and gender differences impact labor and consumption and savings and unpaid care work, we want to get a better understanding of all these differences towards the system that we want to develop to support the requirements of the population. Now, this work is very much also using economic equations, as you will, to ensure that the data that we get from the household survey are systematically used, which is the linking to the national accounts in terms of a basic equation of consumption, savings, and income. And what you then basically are able to understand is that you get a life cycle deficit, which I will show, which is in the last equation, where you basically see the deficits that have to be met in terms of revenues from private transfers, from public transfers, and from assets. Now, the interesting part that you then get is get an understanding, and this is for Europe, how you see that in the early ages, let's say up to 20, there is a support needed in terms of public transfers and private transfers. But then you go to this cycle from, let's say, 25 till about 60, where you see that in that age group, you know, you become a net contributor to those that need support on the private sector, but also that they contribute to the public tax systems to actually allow support to be provided to the young. But we also see that there is also in Europe, of course, a need to support the people beyond 60 in their retirement age. So what you basically see is that you can organize these statistics in a very interesting and very public policy-oriented approach that is very useful, using balances in a more systematic work. This is work done in 80 countries, I should say, national transfer accounts, but it is not done by statistical offices and only in 2 or 3 particular countries. So what you see is there's a lot of work being done by the academic community in this case that basically hasn't really been presented at the Commission. And this is important to understand in the mapping what sort of activities are taking place beyond, let's say, our traditional NSI community, but also what's happening in the specialized departments like health and education, and we'll talk about that later in their presentations. Let me turn to why this would be useful. I showed you what is the system, and I did it very briefly. It's also to discuss why we do it. And the sentiment is that there is a need for a frame of reference. There is also a need, as Stefan indicated, to identify the scope and purpose of the domain. It's a necessity. I think at this point, we see a lot of material being generated, but we have to systematize the methodologies, and looking across all these different domains. A lot of work has been done in ensuring consistency, but as we bring it all together, we want to have a relook at that in terms of concept, definitions, classifications, indicators. Are there matrices that we understand would be useful? I just give you an example, and WHO has its own population estimates, as has the population division at DESA, and it is important that we understand these methodologies better to come up with a unique number, as there are now probably two numbers, and Steve will talk more about that. There's also a need with a framework to systematize an integrated data collection solution. So if you don't have it, it will be very difficult to bring the various communities, various subsystems together in a more systematized integrated data collection that is being aspired by the Friends of the Chair. You need that framework to understand how the various subsystems relate or do not relate. An important aspect, I think, which will help to identify the domain in terms of a system, would also that it would contribute, at least under the Statistical Commission, about the institutional governance and coordination of the custodian agency, if such a manual would be inspired by all those that are custodians of these different systems. So what you see, it has a methodological sort of benefit, as you will, but it also has a data collection benefit in terms of solutions, and it also has an institutional coordination aspect that needs to be considered if you bring these elements together. And I have learned this in my work with the system of national accounts, but also on the system of environmental economic account, to bring these different sort of players together under a common sort of head, as you will. Now, I just wanted to raise, because there is in this attendance a diverse group, but I think one of the groups that will definitely participate now is also on the social demographic side. Why we want to move, in addition to indicators and statistics, also to tables and matrices as an account, although they seem to be, as I learned from Francesca, a bit alien to the community. Now, I just wanted to indicate, and I think others will mention that later also, like Stephen and Raphael, about the need to bring balances towards the toxin flow. So it is in terms of the statistical quality. It is also allows us to understand the contradictory results between data sources. If you bring the different sort of elements together, you can see how to resolve some of these issues. Some data are much stronger than others, and we can make a choice which one we would follow in terms of putting the statistics together, and the system helps you to bring that together in terms of an identity. There's an understanding of the overlaps and gaps. There's also an important aspect that we need to understand is that we can bring much more these relationships together in the various sort of subsystems, which also improve the statistical quality and consistency across the various subsystems of statistics and indicators. And then there is an important element that is still at the heart, that we want to have an integrated multidimensional system of statistics. So we want to link to the economy and we want to link to the environment. Now, I conclude by indicating that these matrices, tables and accounts are extremely useful also for forecasting of different sort of services and modeling that go into the social demographic transition. And we have to try to map these sort of activities as they take place, probably beyond the national statistical offices, in specific departments. And we will learn more about that also from Raphael and Steve about what is happening in their domain. Now, I would like to bring this together in the different sort of elements that we can think about in terms of the main component. This is a proposal, but it draws very much on the work that is done in the past, as well as tries to bring together some of the information that Francesca presented. There is a whole discussion still to be done around the social conditions and concerns. So these are the subsystems that needs to be understood. We can find better wordings. We can maybe merge some of them. We may have to extend to some of them. We have to bring a system approach to this, which provides concept definitions and so forth. Also, the indicators and the accounts that has to be brought together. We can also move to a composite indicators that develop these relationships. I think what we want to do is give an idea about the data sources that come together. There's a particular attention, particularly to special population groups, as has been indicated, in terms of women, elderly, gender, and so forth. You can read yourself. There's a need at this particular space of social demographic statistic to look at geospatial disaggregation. And then there is this whole notion that comes from these conferences that was mentioned by Francisca around special topics. And here I mention education, health, housing, and so forth that need to be brought forward that we have to consider in this particular domain. Let me conclude and set up the next two sort of speakers, or next three speakers, in terms of a proposal. We have a presentation on the national accounts and the updates. Now, I just wanted to point out, and those that are interested about the history, there has been a broad discussion in the 70s about the broader welfare approach to the system of national accounts, and I just mentioned them. And if you see those that were discussed in the 70s, and the documents are on the Commission website, they are very much in line of what the 2025 update now basically looks at in terms of distribution, education, human capital, healthcare, household service work. If we look now also at the work that has been done by a subsystem on labor and work in the 70s, we see that there are particular elements being raised in terms of employment, working condition, employment services, but that work has considerably extended, and we'll see that in the presentation of Raphael, around a much broader sort of set of themes in terms of competitiveness and productivity, poverty and inequality, and so forth, but also unpaid work and special groups. He will also indicate the work on decent work and social justice. So you see that these sort of updates, if we want to bring that together in a particular subdomain, then we have to really look at what is new and how to bring that new terminology and that new sort of learning forward. The same is with health. In the 70s, we see a limited number of topics, but that has broadened dramatically under the World Health Assembly, around a broader set of issues of universal health care, disease burden, and so forth. And we'll talk about a little bit about this and how this developed. An important aspect that I wanted to raise, and will be raised by Stephen, that in health, we have developed health accounts. That is an important aspect of, let's say, the development of bringing one subdomain very clearly in terms of balancing of information systems in terms of accounts and tables. We will also have a presentation by Oliver from the African perspective on the data collection systems. They were described already in the 70s in terms of population and housing census. We had the household capability program. There was this notion of using administrative resources, but that has proliferated in a much broader set of surveys. There has been a systematic decade census program that has been developed, but there are also particular new surveys that are being developed, like the demographic health surveys, the multi-cluster indicator system, the multi-dimensional poverty index surveys, in addition to the household income and expenditure survey. So you see a plethora of data collection instruments, and maybe with a system approach, we could bring some of these collections instruments together. Of course, in discussion with those surveys being undertaken by agencies that are not part of the national statistical systems in some indications. Let me also mention that I'm sure that that is the direction of travel about microdata linking and data exchange. So what you basically have here is a presentation of an orientation of the system in terms of its components, why we want it, and what it actually means. I hope that we are able to take this work forward in terms of updates of particular subsystems, and I hope, for instance, with this discussion around labor and health, we can have some deeper dives. We also need to want to look more closely to what is happening in the update of the system of national accounts and reflect that, as has been already been discussed in the 70s, in making sure that we are very closely linked to the system of national accounts, but also now increasingly with the environmental accounts that needs to be reflected in the system as we want to pursue it. Stefan, I stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ivo. And I think we started the day with, let me put it this way, this is the Economic Network, Statisticians Network. We hopped over the fence into the garden of our neighbors, into the social universe, and we looked around with a social perspective, with social glasses. That's what Francesca did, and then a little bit with the glasses of national accountants. I mean, we saw some of the tools and the descriptors that we are used to. Let's make the connection now back to our system of national accounts, hopping back over the fence into our economics garden. And look what we are doing in the economics field, where we very much have many of these concerns that we just listed under the social policy agenda in our vision field. And for that, I pass the chairing over to Ivo, who can introduce the work being done under the 2025 SNA review that focuses precisely on these dimensions of integrating the social and economic dimensions. Ivo.
Oh, thank you, Stefan. No, it's a real privilege to introduce Catherine van Rompuy and Jorrit Zwijnenberg. Catherine is a principal economist from the World Bank, and Jorrit is the lead on national accounts at the OECD. Both are intimately related, working on the update of the 2024, and both will give us an insight in one of the themes of the update, which is on well-being and sustainability, and will cover particular areas that I already identified in my slides that are important to consider, given the work that has moved forward in the system of national accounts in the absence of a system of social and demographic statistics. And it is important that we have reached that level of maturity in some of these areas in terms of accounts, consistency with the SNA, moving forward. So a lot of work has been done, and the inspiration we can get from the SNA. And with that, I would like to pass on to Catherine and Jorrit and give them the floor to present what has been done for the 2025 SNA update. With that, Stefan, I hope they're on the call, that they will join. Catherine or Jorrit, I do not know how you exactly have organized yourself, but I'll leave it to both of you.
I'll lead off. Thanks a lot, Ivo.
Okay, good.
I'll just
Great.
try and share my screen. I don't see anything now. So do you folks see my slides?
Yes, we do.
Okay.
And we can hear you.
And you can see them in presentation mode? Yes.
Not yet.
Not yet. Now?
Now, yes.
Okay.
I think now we're set to go.
Okay. So thank you all for the opportunity to join this very interesting conversation. It's very fascinating for me to learn that these ideas date back to Richard Stone, a Nobel laureate and one of the pioneers of national accounts. So we're really standing on the shoulders of giants, as it were. And a great deal has been built upon this foundation in the nearly 50 years since 1975. So back to the quote unquote hardcore national accountants, we'd like to bring you, I guess, back over to this side of the fence. And in the context of the SNA update, we are in fact taking very important steps to make standard or traditional macroeconomic measures more relevant to well-being and sustainability. And in doing so, our focus is really to look at how the SNA can appropriately contribute to this dialogue, and to make the connections with these other relevant systems is our focus, rather than trying to subsume the systems or take over the world, as it were. So I think this sentiment is very much in line with the conversation that we've been having so far this morning. So while there are limits to what we can reasonably accomplish within the SNA domain, we have to be somewhat constrained by pragmatism. We are nonetheless taking some very important steps that are very relevant to this conversation around beyond GDP. So just as has been mentioned by both Stefan and Ivo, this process has been going on for some time now for the SNA update. I actually became involved as chair of the Wellbeing and Sustainability Task Team when I was a member of the Advisory Expert Group on National Accounts at Statistics Canada. And that was back in 2019. And I maintained the role when I went to the World Bank. So now, at this point in the process, about more than 3 years in, the guidance is very well developed and mostly endorsed. And we're advancing work on the actual SNA 2025 manual, which is targeted for publication at that time. The OECD houses the Secretariat for the Wellbeing and Sustainability Task Team. And Jort and I, as has been mentioned, collaborate very closely on this particular agenda. We also represent two of the organizations, the World Bank and the OECD, that participate in the interagency collaborative governance model around the System of National Account Standards, which also includes, of course, the UN, the IMF, and Eurostat. So just to go through the outline of the presentation, and we won't have time in this brief presentation to go into a whole lot of detail on the proposals, but we hope you will take a look at the website. You'll find all the detailed guidance there if you want to understand exactly more precisely what's included. So I'd encourage you to go and take a look at it. And as you'll see, a great deal of effort and a large number of experts have contributed to the development of all of these various guidance notes, and it's been subject to extensive discussion and consultation. We've actually just finished an update of guidance note number 1 in our nomenclature, which describes the broader framework for well-being and sustainability in an SNA context. Unfortunately, it's not up on the site yet, pending endorsement from the advisory expert group, but it should be up there fairly soon. So as we mentioned, Jort and I will share the presentation. I will look after the introduction and give you an overview of some of the principal recommendations on well-being and sustainability that will be included in SNA 2025. Jort will take over at when we get to distributions for the household sector and cover the main implications on the System of National Accounts, implementation considerations, and next steps from our perspective. So some context that I think most here will be very familiar with, and we always lead off with this statement, which is very pertinent to the Beyond GDP debate, which is, while not designed for this purpose, the GDP is often misused as an indicator of societal progress. The SNA already includes other sorry, I hear someone speaking on the line. If we could all mute, that would be great. Thank you.
Can you please mute? Thanks.
Thanks. So while not, so the SNA already includes other more relevant indicators for aspects of well-being, so indicators that focus on the household sector, for example. But nonetheless, there is a need for greater insight into other aspects, such as, for example, distributions for the household sector, many of the themes that have already been mentioned and were mentioned back in 1975. Unpaid household survey work, labor, education, human capital, healthcare, and the impact of the environment on the economy. The economic activity on the environment. So measurement really warrants enhancing and broadening this framework to analyze the interrelationships, trade-offs, and win-wins among these domains, but hooked to a regular compilation that includes the standard sequence of macroeconomic indicators that come out of the System of National Accounts. So our goal within this update in the Wellbeing and Sustainability Task Team was not to fundamentally reinvent macroeconomic indicators that serve a very important policy purpose already, except in some certain ways, but mainly on the regular compilation of additional breakdowns or extended modules that draw on existing mature guidance that has been developed, for example, within the context of well-developed satellite accounts. And also to leverage the main benefits of linking to the sequence of economic accounts within the SNA. So the strength of the underlying conceptual and methodological framework, so that policy users can directly assess how economic events tie into well-being and sustainability themes in a systematic integrated measurement framework. And this approach also ensures a high degree of cross-country comparability. So if you sort of broadly conceptualize, you can think about the proposals that we're introducing under well-being and sustainability. I guess I should use the word recommendations because they're no longer proposals. Relate to current well-being, so the themes we've already mentioned: household income and consumption, labor, healthcare, education, unpaid household survey service work. and also those that relate to future well-being, which really relate to the, if you want, the asset base or capital in its various forms, whether it be economic, natural, human. Social capital is often recognized, as has already been mentioned, as part of a broader concept of wealth, or if you want, comprehensive wealth, but we don't have a good measurement framework that will tie it in with an economic measure at this point in time. The proposals within this framework also include breakdowns by household groups. And so, for example, income and wealth deciles or household composition, and also include socio-demographic characteristics that are ideally standardized across all the components so that they can be linked effectively. So moving to current well-being, a little bit more detail on the content of some of these proposals. And we're using our nomenclature, which you will, if you take a look at the web, you'll see we've kind of organized our work in terms of specific guidance notes that were developed by subtask teams. And so one of the principal recommendations in the guidance on labor education and human capital is to include new labor tables as a standard component to the sequence of national accounts, which focus on 4 dimensions: jobs, persons, volume in terms of, for example, hours, and payments in terms of labor costs. And these labor accounts can also be extended because we've developed, modules that can be connected with one another with information on unpaid household service work, which is also part of another set of guidance. Healthcare recommends the regular compilation of supplementary income information on healthcare expenditure. The tables focus on breakdowns on function of healthcare providers and the financing of the healthcare system. Again, these can be extended for the provision of healthcare through unpaid household service work. So really where our task ends for healthcare, and when I get to it, education, is really around the functioning of the healthcare system and the provision of healthcare, and not on healthcare outcomes. But we would hope that we could link to these indicators through the way that the information is presented. Education recommends the regular compilation of thematic tables on education and training that focus on the breakdowns of output and expenditure by purpose, provider, and financing. Again, we're putting in the time dimension of time spent on learning. And again, we're talking about the function of the education system rather than education outcomes per se. Unpaid household service work recommends the compilation of supplementary accounts on unpaid household service work at least every 5 years. So we would extend supply and use tables in the national accounts framework with estimates in physical units. So we're talking about hours, for example, spent on activities, and monetary terms that are broken down by various types of activities. We were also proposing to use measures that derive complementary estimates of gross domestic product. So if you want extended estimates, and household disposable income that include the value of unpaid household service work, and also memorandum items to arrive at a complete accounting for the use of time. Future well-being. So again, we're going into the domain of wealth and assets, and wealth broadly conceived to also include natural capital, so for example, to give you a bird's eye view of this one, we're including a new asset for renewable energy resources. This is one of the areas where we are, in fact, impacting the core accounts. WS8, which is a guidance note on biological resources to clarify the treatment, recommends removing a distinction between cultivated and non-cultivated biological assets that's currently in the SNA, and only distinguishing between migrating and non-migrating assets. So to clarify that treatment. Environmental classifications, which is covered by WS12, suggests additional breakdowns for environment-related assets and flows, and recommends separately distinguishing natural assets in the SNA. And here we are also introducing the concept of sustainable finance, which Jort will talk a little bit about later. WS6, which is about economic ownership and depletion of natural resources, proposes a split asset approach for resource rents between the legal owner and the extractor, and it also recommends, and this is very significant for national accounts, recording the depletion of natural resources as a standard component, so as a cost of production within the SNA, with more emphasis on net measures, so NDP as opposed to GDP as being a meaningful indicator. WS10 proposes further clarifications on the application of the net present value method in the SNA. So really bringing some of the wisdom from the SIA into the SNA proper. And WS7 talks about specifically the treatment of emission permits and trading schemes to make sure that that is logical and clarified within the SNA. And we also have guidance on supplementary table capturing provisions that are related to terminal costs, again, in the environment kind of sphere. For human capital, we are recommending the development of extended tables on human capital according to two valuation approaches, the lifetime earnings approach and the cost-based approach. We need some more work to better improve these methods in the future, but for now we are recommending those two alternatives. So we'd like to sort of have something more consistent. There are still a lot of unresolved questions about how this activity finds its way through the sequence of accounts, and we hope to develop that further in the research agenda in the future. Now, social capital is in gray here, and as I mentioned, it's acknowledged that social capital is often referenced in relation to comprehensive wealth or extended wealth measures, but due to a lack of consensus or common definition in deriving market values, it is not proposed for exclusion in the SNA. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to my partner in crime, Jorrit Swijnenberg from OECD. Jorrit, I can't see you, so I'm assuming that you can see the slides and you'll let me know when I need to switch.
Yes, I will do.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
You'll have to cue me verbally because I can't see you.
No problem, no problem. Thank you very much, Catherine, and hello everyone. Also, thanks from my side for the invitation. Indeed, a very interesting event. So very glad to bring you up to speed with what we have been doing in this area on the SNA side. In addition to the topics that Catherine already mentioned, to provide more insights on elements affecting well-being and sustainability, we also would like to include more information on the distributions of household income, consumption and wealth to make sure that we provide more insight in how different household groups are faring. If you could move to the next slide, Catherine. So in this sense, indeed, the SNA includes aggregated information on the household sector, but this may conceal very important information that is of relevance to policy users to see how different groups of households are being affected. So in this sense, indeed, there is the recommendation for the regular compilation of household distributions in the form of supplementary accounts. A lot of work ongoing in this area. And whereas the main focus of this ongoing work for now is to have the breakdowns consistently for income, consumption and wealth, it can also be applied to some of the other topics that were presented by Catherine. So for example, also look at distributional information related to unpaid household work and to include these breakdowns in labor tables, etc. And then in addition to that, it's also useful to bring in the socio-demographic angle, so to have specific additional breakdowns, for example, according to gender, age, education, employment status, to also provide insights in how different groups, according to those socio-demographic breakdowns, are being affected. And I think this nicely links to some of the breakdowns that were presented by Francesca and Ivo in the earlier presentations. If we go to the next slide. So I'm now going to focus on the main implications on the accounts. So in this sense, we have a lot of recommendations for supplementary information, additional breakdowns. Some of it will be covered within the main sequence of accounts. Some of it will be in the form of extended accounts. So in the next few slides, we present the main changes indeed to what is going to change in the core system. So first of all, updating the sector classification. So we have the institutional sectors, the main sectors highlighted here, and then there is going to be additional subsectoring for the household sector in view of the distributional information. So breakdowns by disposable income group, net worth group, and also according to main source of income, household type. And in this sense, there might be more envisaged, but this is what is going to be recommended for the core for now. Moving to the next slide, we also have some updates to the transaction classification. So first of all, this concerns the inclusion of a separate item for the depletion of natural resources to show this as a cost of production and to bear this in mind when moving from gross to the net measures. So very important to have this in the accounts. And then there are also some further breakdowns for the rent category to have more linkages to the specific type of natural resources this relates to. So rent on land, renewable, non-renewable energy, etc. And also a category for rent related to non-natural resources. This is being debated in the area of the creation of data, for example, in relation to people giving up their privacy. A totally different discussion on that, but it's good to mention it here. And then to the next slide, we also see some changes to the asset classification, and this is mainly related to the proposals or the recommendations in the area of the natural resource accounting. So as Catherine mentioned, we will have a separate category in the new breakdown on natural capital. And for that purpose, there are some changes to the terminology for the produced non-financial assets and the non-produced non-financial assets, specifying that this will exclude natural resources, which will be presented separately. And on the left-hand side, you also see a new item, a memorandum item for the consumer durables, which are quite relevant in view of household distributional information and also related to unpaid household activities where consumer durables might be used in the production of these services. On the natural capital, you see, you see some changes to the terminology in green, non-renewable mineral and energy reserves and biological resources yielding repeat products. And then there is some additional categories in red that are proposed for addition to the sequence of accounts. At the top, you see indeed renewable mineral and energy resources with specific breakdowns, and more towards the bottom, you see biological resources yielding once only products. And there is a clear demand for this type of information. Very important to have these breakdowns on renewable, also in change of the transition, the energy transition taking place. So very important to include that in the main sequence of accounts. And at the bottom, you also see in italic the human capital more on an experimental basis included in the sequence of accounts. Next slide. We see also some changes to the financial asset categories. So this is more related to sustainable finance. So having subcategories within debt securities and loans to single out ESG loans and also green loans and green bonds. And at the bottom, there is also a separate category for emission permits, and this is going to be included under other accounts payable receivable. And this is still under discussion, and hopefully the AEG is going to take a decision on this in the next couple of weeks. Moving to the next slide. So now focusing to some implementation considerations. So moving to the next. So what is going to change in the SNA in this area is that well-being sustainability will be given high prominence. So there will be a new chapter 2 that is focusing on the importance of capturing well-being and sustainability in the national accounts, and then 2 specific chapters, 34, 35, that will provide detailed guidance on current and well-being and sustainability, respectively, linking indeed to what we have presented in this presentation. And we realize this is quite ambitious, and this is quite this might concern quite a lot of work on the side of the countries. So several recommendations may imply sourcing new data. And there may also be a need for more practical guidance to assist countries in implementing some of this new guidance. Some elements are quite new, and we have to exchange best practices to help countries in arriving at comparable estimates. So we think this may be facilitated by dedicated expert groups, task forces, workshops, seminars. We are indeed already foreseeing a specific expert group in the area of the natural capital. There may also be a need for re-examining the labeling of some specific elements, such as the depletion as a cost of production, and how are we going to advertise the new net measures in that sense, making sure that people are understanding them for what they are and are going to use them increasingly. And there may also be a need for a discussion on the prioritization. There is quite a lot of recommendations for supplementary tables, and we have to see what is feasible, at what frequency, at what timeliness, etc., etc. And this will require careful discussions between the compilers and the users, both at the national level and at the international level. And then moving to the next slide and the final slide, the next one. So this is more in terms of next steps. So most of the guidance as we presented in this overview have already been endorsed. So this is mainly a summary of what has been recommended and how it links together within the framework and how people can indeed make interlinkages. So in that sense, the guidance note WS1 is describing the overall framework, and as Catherine mentioned, it will soon go out for global consultation. I think the deadline for the advisory expert group was yesterday, so we may need to make some final tweaks and then send it out for global consultation. And the global consultation is mainly focusing on whether the endorsed recommendations have been properly reflected. Views of countries, compilers and users on the prioritization of the various recommendations, and some of the main challenges that people may envisage and where we may need to come up with additional guidance in that sense and may assist them in the implementation. And we definitely encourage huge participation in that sense. We are looking for SNA compilers, but also indeed at the other side of the fence, we would welcome a lot of feedback to make sure that this is indeed serving user demands, is feasible for the compilers, and links nicely with other statistics focusing on similar topics. So with that, I would like to conclude. Thank you very much for your attention, and glad to hear if there are any questions or comments. Thank you very much. I think it's back to you, Ivo.
Oh, yes, Ivo, can you hear us?
Thank you. I think this is, great work that has been presented, and it shows the progress that has been made around well-being and sustainability. I don't know whether we have time, maybe Stefan, or we should push on this. I know that Catherine and Jorrit may not be able to stay on till the end. So if there's maybe questions at this point, then maybe the participants may want to maybe concentrate on the SNA at this point, and then we can take a more broader discussion later on the other topics. So maybe with that, I can just quickly open it up with your permission. I don't see anything in the chat in particular, but if there are others, please intervene. Yeah,
sorry,
go ahead.
I can stay till the end. I think Jorrit might have to duck out because we have another meeting. But I can stay
perfect.
Till the end, so, yeah.
Excellent, excellent. I don't see immediate reactions, Stefan, so I bring it back to you again to push on. Yeah.
Yes, and I'll play the ball right over to Francesca for our session 4, the perspectives on Beyond GDP.
Okay, thank you, Stefan. Let me go back to the agenda. Indeed, we are ready to start with the next session, where we'll hear from our colleagues from WHO, ILO, and ECA. In particular, we have Steve McFeely, who is the Director of Data and Analytics at the World Health Organization, who is the first to go presenting the perspective on Beyond GDP from WHO. Steve, you have the floor if you're ready.
Thanks, Francesca. Thanks, Stefan. Hi, everybody. So let me just get the most stressful part of the presentation over with. If I can find my slides. So I hope I'm in presentation mode.
Yes, we can see you presentation mode.
Okay, great. So unlike Francesca and Ivo, who give a very logical structured talk, I'm going to jump around a bit. So a bit like social and demographic statistics itself, my talk is going to be a bit more fragmented, and you can make up your mind whether the conceptual framework for the talk was clear or not. But I'm going to try and blend the issues of Beyond GDP and the Friends of the Chair for Social and Demographic Statistics. So bear with me. So the key message here really is that the determinants of health and the outcomes for health usually actually lie outside the health sector itself. So not only from a data perspective, but from a policy and a research perspective, it's absolutely critical that we can link health data with other aspects of economic and social data. And in WHO parlance, that's the difference when we talk about health information systems and information systems for health. That's really the distinction we're making, is health information systems really are just purely about health. Information systems for health is when we try and pull in everything else. So health doesn't exist in a vacuum, and we need to all the time be mindful of that. So just to give you an example of why that's the case. So late last year, a number of UN agencies and a group called Vital Strategies came together, and we published a blog, with 2 blogs in fact, on the importance of CRVS. Okay, I can hear a bit of background chatter, but and what we were trying to point out there, really, it's a perfect example of why health needs to be connected to other domains. For example, one of the main economic ambitions that we often hear from the UN is that we want to formalize economies. But in fact, you can't formalize economies if people aren't registered, because you can't tax the people in that economy. Equally, you can't maintain and you can't run fair elections, because electoral registries can't be updated and electoral boundaries can't be updated. Living outside documented, if you're living undocumented without a birth certificate, without identity papers, then the simplest things in life, whether it's getting a driving license, getting a job, securing citizenship, all of these things are just beyond your reach. So it's a perfect example of why we need to link across different domains. There was an article in the New York Times a couple of weeks ago which picked up on this issue, and there was a very interesting quote in it, which is Prabhat Jha talks about the catch-22. When you don't have good data, you're forced to use mathematical models, and that's challenging for a number of reasons, not least because it forces you to use data, and then what it also does, it kind of papers over the cracks so that people don't necessarily understand that the data that are being used or being presented aren't actually as good as they think. So let me give you an example here. This is what I'm calling the mixed blessing of models. So on the left-hand side, you see a chart that's presented by WHO, which is called Universal Health Coverage, which is a composite index. And in this, we show the progress, including a forecast up to 2025. Now, if you took that chart at face value, you would think that WHO has all of the data required to construct that composite index. But in fact, if you look at the right-hand side, you see the indicators that are used in that composite, and along the x-axis you see a time series. Green cells means we have good quality data. Red cells means we're missing data, and kind of orange is somewhere in between. And what you can see is for quite a number of indicators, we have quite sparse data, and you can also see at the extreme right that the timeliness is problematic. So one of the things that we're doing within WHO now is to include these data density charts along with our indices so that people have a better sense of the quality. The other thing that we've done, which again is very important, which is to include uncertainty estimates around the point estimate. But I should stress that these uncertainty estimates are only the uncertainty of the model estimate, and they don't reflect the uncertainty in the underlying quality. And I think that the reason I'm kind of saying this is I think there's an elephant in the room across this whole discussion, which is data sources. If we really want to nowcast and forecast and have timely data, in a lot of domains, we have to use unofficial data to do that, to feed the model. And I think that's a conversation that's maybe a bit awkward for some member states, but this is an issue that we really have to face. Another issue around health statistics that I want to stress is the importance of space, and in particular what I would call functional space rather than administrative space. So I've just given a very simple example here, which is our estimates of the distribution or the changes in snake populations over the next 25 years. And what you can see is the red areas is where we see a significant migration of poisonous snakes, which are more than currently exist, and blue show a deterioration. This is largely driven by climate. And so the point really I'm making here is that borders are irrelevant to disease, to climate change, and to animals. And this poses a challenge for administrative data, which by their nature tend to reflect national and subnational boundaries. So let me just, and why this is important for health as well is because of climate change, we're starting to see the re-emergence of some communicable diseases, which we thought we had eradicated. Now, my apologies to anybody in Australia. This may not be the best news, but this is just an example of the coastal taipan, which is a poisonous snake. And what you can see is over the next kind of 25 years, we expect people in the Brisbane area to have a lot more of these neighbours. And again, that's been driven by climate change. So this is really important when we think about the Friends of the Chair, because we can also start thinking about doing linkages spatially, not just temporally. And I think there's huge untapped potential, and Stefan and others will be well aware of this. This is why the importance of GIS is so critical. Now, a term that we use in national accounts a lot is balancing. For those of you who are national accountants, you'll know that balancing is actually a bit of a black art rather than a science. But nevertheless, it forces the reconciliation between supply and demand. As Ivo mentioned in his talk, there are elements in social and demographic statistics where we try to use a balancing approach, in particular life tables, where we try and reconcile the inflows, which is basically fertility or births, with the stocks, and then also with the outflows, which is net migration, and also those who have passed away. Currently, there's two main sets of life tables that exist. There's the life tables that are produced by the UN Population Division, which used a balanced approach. And then there's the WHO version, which uses different data sources, but also doesn't really use a balanced approach. Intuitively, I prefer the UN model because I understand the reconciliation process. And in fact, there's a discussion here. I mean, does WHO really need to produce its own life tables? I think that's a valid question to ask. But I think I'm using this as an example. I think there may be other areas where we can cross-reconcile social data and impose constraints. And in my experience, estimates that don't have constraints imposed, they often tend to inflate the estimates. That's been my experience both in Ireland and at UNCTAD previously. So there is a value for reconciliation apart from just consistency. I think in a lot of cases it leads to better quality statistics. So a little bit then about the health accounts, because this is about Beyond GDP. So back in the 60s, early 60s, WHO commissioned some studies on health expenditure analysis. But in actual fact, between then and the turn of the century, really, it's all about OECD. It's OECD that have developed the health accounts and really invested the time in this. And it's only around 1999, 2000 that WHO began a program to systematically beginning to measure health accounts. The main point, I guess, let me roll on to the next slide, is really around the boundary. And you see this with many other areas, whether it's environment, whether it's tourism. What's the boundary of health? What's in health and what's outside of health? But this is very important because obviously there's economic and financial dimensions to health, and they're captured in the system of health accounts. But when we start thinking ahead now to well-being, will that have implications for the system of health accounts? Will that extend the boundary? And it's also very important as well for other elements of health. So, for example, one of the main WHO ambitions or vision targets is to achieve universal health coverage. And universal health coverage means achieving, basically getting access to the health services that you need when you need them, but in a way that doesn't financially bankrupt you to do it. So in other words, where you don't incur financial hardship. So this is where the finance part of the financing interface, which is part of the triaxle, becomes really, really important. So this kind of brings us full circle. So now, just last week, in fact, the WHO published the Transforming Economies to Deliver What Matters, which is essentially the health version of Valuing What Counts. So this was the Economic Council for WHO has produced their view on kind of maybe how to integrate health into the SNA, how to deal with issues like well-being. One of the things that we're looking at is we have a metric called healthier populations, which is part of our 3 billion targets. And it's not an especially well-defined population. So one of the things that we're now considering is whether well-being could be subsumed into this, and this would become a health and well-being population. And that will actually allow us to incorporate those into our kind of standard metrics. But again, we're keeping a weather eye on what's happening with the Beyond GDP network and what's happening with the SNA updates, because we want to make sure that whatever we do is consistent with those going into the future. So just one last slide, coming back to the importance of linkages. This is from a paper I published some years ago, and it's really kind of setting out a model for what you would need to do to really develop linkages. And it focuses on 3 pillars. So one is the legal framework, making sure we have the good data governance in place that would allow us to safely move data. The other one is data infrastructure, which is things like classifications, unique identifiers, and so on, that will just facilitate the movement of data. And this pillar is very important because too often I think this is written off as an IT problem or requiring an IT solution. But in fact, it requires a data architecture before we can actually impose the IT solutions. And then coordination. So those of you who are familiar with the UN system, I mean, we put a lot of time and effort into trying to coordinate our activities, but that must happen at a national level as well. So the statistical office must coordinate with the line departments to make sure that they enact that they actually exercise the muscle of statistical legislation so that they get access to those data. So key messages. Health doesn't exist in a bubble. They must be linkable to other statistics. So I'm on a mission to try and de-silo health statistics. Models can be useful, but they must be transparent. We must be honest about the quality. Disease, climate, animals, none of those respect borders or administrative boundaries. So I think we're going to see in the coming years that functional space is going to become more and more important. I think balancing and constraints are important. I think they control our worst excesses. And I think there is more that we can do here in the social domain. The health accounts continue to develop. This is where we reconcile supply and demand and finance. And again, as I said, I think the incorporation of well-being may have some interesting dimensions here. Health and well-being may lead to a reconceptualization of one of our main targets, which is called the healthier population. And just all of this requires data infrastructure, both governance and soft infrastructure, which we typically call coordination. So with that, I'll stop here. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Steve. I think I really enjoyed your presentation. I like the fact that you highlighted the enabling factors that need to happen at the country level. So it's not just deciding to establishing a system per se, statistical system. You also need to have the legal framework that support that. You need to have proper coordination among the many data producers that agree to that. And then, of course, the data infrastructure itself based on data architecture, but also on a proper IT. I also like the fact that you mentioned the modeling part, because to come up with this balancing input-output type of matrices, we will have to go into imputing the data and modeling the data. And as you properly mentioned, we need to have a discussion also the Statistical Commission to make sure the member states feel comfortable with that. So thank you again, a lot of learning from your side as usual, but let's move to our dear Rafael, who is going to talk about Beyond GDP from the perspective of ILO. And Rafael Diaz de Medina is the Chief Statistician and Director of the Department of Statistics at the International Labour Organization. Rafael, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you. I will try to problem here. Let me check. Maybe I don't know what happens here.
You can share from Team or you can share from your PowerPoint.
Yeah, I prefer to share from my PowerPoint.
Yeah, sometimes it's a very little icon on the right.
Yes, I saw,
left.
but then it says OneDrive, but it doesn't. PowerPoint presentation doesn't. PowerPoint presentation, I guess. No.
Try from the Teams.
Yes, I'm trying.
From share.
Sorry about that.
No worries. We always have the backup if you prefer.
No, because it's no, I think it's.
Benson, just in case, if you can get ready.
Here. Here it is. Let me see if it is. Is it?
Let's see.
You are seeing?
Not yet on my side. No, I don't see it. Rafael, is it okay if we play it from our side?
The only problem is I did a couple of changes, but
You can still
yeah.
point
No,
them
because
out.
it doesn't work. I don't know why.
Yeah, it doesn't work. So Benson, can you please move the slides for Rafael? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry about that. I don't know why. Okay. Okay, like Stephen, I will not be very structured. I will also share the same thing in the sense that I've seen already a lot of things that we have already heard that we have already common, particularly the historical travel that Francesca had provided at the very beginning. I think it's important, and we also have a similar thing. So in terms of the overview, the next one, I will try, although I will change a bit the order. Of course, the labor structure, and I guess that I also have the same, I would say, very similar things like Stephen, in the sense that it's not a bubble. Its models are also very important for us. We need to work, and we have been working on labor accounts, and also the national statistical system infrastructure is key. So I will rescue this as a common ground with health, but I guess that is similar with other areas of the social thing. I would not think that we are in different benches. I think being an economist and working on labor, I really think that we have a lot of commonalities. So we have the same I would say problems, but we see them with a different perspective. Of course, the social aspects and the social demographic aspects are correct. At this moment of time, we are not a bubble. So statistics is not a bubble. We are in the moment that social cohesion, social justice, inequalities, unrest of citizens, lack of trust, human rights problems, peace, many things, human rights. There are many things that are in the political sphere that requires us to think, and had required a lot from different sectors and different areas of labor, of social statistics, to address and to provide quickly some evidence, because there is a political call for this. It's not that we are in a bubble. And statisticians, we cannot be in a bubble, and this is what we have seen from the labor perspective. Of course, labor, it's quite core and for well-being, and nobody can deny we all work, we all receive earnings, we all have different, we all suffer probably harassment, long hours of work. We could have witnessed child labor. We could have seen a lot of problems in the world of work. But of course, this clearly has economic implications. It has clearly social implications and even political implications. So this means that the interrelated and the system that Eva was describing and Francesca was traveling along the time and the time frame, how this has been solved, is a never-ending issue. And I think now more than ever we are confronted to give a response. So timeliness of this effort more than ever, and I think this is important. In the case of labor, of course, it's related to education and training. It's related to environment, because we have seen now in Steve's presentation, but I can also show you the impact that we have in different in labor, in employment of many jobs that are disappearing because of climate change. And many are at risk. And there are a lot of assessments where we know that areas will not have the main industries that they used to have. So this means also a health problem, because we also have health issues related to work, occupational safety and health, accidents at work, risk. We have seen the COVID pandemics, etc. Housing, rights, human rights, because labor rights are part of human rights that are breached continuously. And then social protection has a clear connection with these flows and time cycle and life cycle that we have seen today. And it has a clear implication for GDP measurement, national accounts, fiscal space, etc. So we are connected. It's not that, and of course, labor, maybe it's clearly a bridge between the social, economic, and environmental statistics. And I usually don't feel that I am completely alien to economic statistics, because we clearly have been working on social accounting matrices. You know, the ILO has been actively working in the 70s and 80s in this timeline that Francesca has produced. I could have identified that also there are attempts where there were clearly attempts to have tables and accounts referring to particularly in disaggregating the household sector and the household account, in order to have probably more disaggregation, like informality, like for gender, household heads of household who are women. There were many attempts to have accounts in this sense. There, in some places, they are used, and we actually use them. But of course, there is also a clear divide in the availability of data in this, and the availability for developing countries and developed countries. In developed countries, we can boast of having labor accounts, very disaggregated. It's a highly formalized economy where we have all the earnings, all the workers, the hours of work are very well computed, while we have in the other side the 80% of the world who lacks the basic infrastructure. And this is, again, my call again to agree with the last point that Stephen has mentioned about the infrastructure and the need to have really a special care of that. So these are the different approaches. Of course, dating back for the standards and how labor statistics have been accompanying this process since the very beginning of the national accounts. We have had, apart from the system of national account of social accounting matrices, we also have been, even I would say earlier in this timeline, because we are a bit older. This year we are celebrating 100 years of the International Conference of Labor Statisticians. This means that it's 1923, which is a bit older than that. But then digging is very interesting, because digging into history, now that we are going to celebrate this in October, we have came across with many interesting things. First, many of the first meetings that, of course, this conference was even created by the Treaty of Versailles. So it's so old that it goes even before, where there was acknowledged that the peace was not possible without labor peace. And because of that, they urged the system in those times, even before the UN and before all of us, to provide sound statistical and harmonization of data. And this is the first thing that, once the ILO was created in 1919, there was a call for immediately agree on what is harmonized data. And in the early ICLSs in 1923, there were already identified issues like CPI, Consumer Price Indexes, which is classically one of the main economic variables for all of us. There were also consumption and expenditure. So this was for these pioneers, I would say in 1923, they were very important, because it was creating the purchasing power of wages in those times. Of course, this means that they needed to provide the main raw materials for labor negotiations, for wage negotiations, for collective bargaining in those times. Because, of course, no wonder 1919 it was created the ILO, is because it was 2 years after 1917 that we know that was a bit eventful as a year, because it was the Russian Revolution. So of course, after that, the statistical activities were triggered by that, and they started to talk about labor accounts already. They started to talk about earnings and how they have to be computed in a way compatible with the productivity. So all these things that we think that are in the 70s or 50s, they are even earlier. And they have started to move that. Even in 1936, the vice president of ICLS was Conrado Gini, who was from ISTAT, a statistician who is very well known because our well-known Gini coefficient. And he was already mentioning the central part of wages and labor conditions as the raw material for inequalities and the need to have proper metrics. So in summing up, it's just to tell you that we are starting from a very old process, but we still are ongoing, and you will see the new advances or the new challenges that we have. We have also, apart from that, the basic needs approach that it was very fashionable in the 70s and 80s. This was created because there was a big enthusiasm about poverty maps and having geospatial information already in those times about how to locate poverty spatially with through the census, through the economic and population census, through household surveys. So I remember some of the discussions long ago of the National Household Survey Capability Program that the UNSD has had in place, where there were a lot of discussions about that, how to take information from from household surveys into particularly to try to approach well-being in a way. It's something that afterwards it came strongly in the well-being initiative. Okay,
Rafael,
so this is
sorry.
Yes.
Sorry, Rafael. Can we move the slide, or are you still on slide one?
Let me check, because we are still with this.
Okay, you are still giving us a full overview. Thank you.
Then the third, I would say the more important thing is particularly the different frameworks that can provide particularly this raw material for a framework vis-a-vis a system. And I think we had the same decisions to make. And in the framework, we tried to establish very early, I would say in 2008, what we call decent work indicator framework. Then yes, please, if you can go in the second thing. Another one. That one. Okay, this is one of the parts of the decent work what we call decent work indicator frameworks, that it was the first attempt to broaden the scope, this original scope from the early ICLS and the early discussions on decent work. It's about having a real perspective of all all type of indicators that can be, I would say, linked both at the macro and the micro level. So there, it's clearly the main aspect was to support the initiative to create a link between what it was a micro analysis based on households unit, and as Papa has mentioned in the chat, we have to go beyond the unit of a household, because of course household, it's very important, but we also have the macro aspects, and it's what is linking clearly with the economic statistics. And this link, of course, has to be based on a very sound national statistical system, that this provides all these streams that you see in the picture to be captured directly, and not only using and not mostly using modeling. But of course, this requires a lot of infrastructure. But this framework has started in 2008 to try to not only focus on labor supply and demand, but also trying to see how to provide some help for employment creation and discussion at the macro level, particularly in in the global. Remember that the ILO is a tripartite organization that deals with workers, employers, and governments. So we have to provide information for these negotiations. And of course, the GDP was not enough. GDP was something, but of course we also had to go deeper into labor accounts, promote the different indicators on productivity, not only the more, I would say, simplified one, but also going deeper in productivity, providing sometimes some light on the enterprises as units, what establishments, not only households, are very important. For us, it's very important because one of the constituents are enterprises, are business for us. So we had to provide also information at the level of establishment. We have tried to also be linking with the well-being initiative, and we have been partners since the very beginning with the OECD at the very beginning, then with other partners who started. I remember in 2008, in the launching of the Sarkozy-Stiglitz, with Sarkozy, the Prime Minister Sarkozy, French one, with Stiglitz, Sen, Fitoussi, and in the first attempt of the Beyond GDP, and the ILO was called along with the OECD and IMF to be part of this launching because it was the acknowledgement that labor and work was at the center of the well-being. And there we have evolved into different frameworks that we have tried to get complementary. If we go to the next slide, this is the structure that it's our, I would say, guide in many aspects, and it's still valid, although we have broadened this. We see 4 dimensions that are clearly related to four social aspects that are key. First, it's employment. Well, we say the second, it says 2, but it's employment opportunities, rights, social protection, and social dialogue. Around this, that is the concept of decent work that it was afterwards taken by Goal 8 explicitly in the SDGs. It's composed of all these type of dimensions. Employment opportunity and work, that we will see that it has a clearly aspect of employment and rights, earnings and productive work, working time, that is hours of work and working time, which is very important. Work, family, and personal life, which is something that is new, is one of these emerging topics that Francesca was alluding. Then stability and security of work, equal opportunity, safe work environment, social protection, which is very important, social dialogue, which is something very related to governance. So it's somehow a democratic, I would say, tissue. So these dimensions were approved in 2008 in the 18 ICLS, where all countries were committed to start providing information around these areas, where, of course, I don't want to go to the details of each of the boxes. We have a myriad of indicators that are proposed in order to accomplish that. This was I can tell you that this was what provided the ground for the sound SDG discussion afterwards, when we had extracted some indicators from this, which were already agreed, that were already, the metadata was agreed, and although it was not all of this, I hope it has been, but it facilitated a lot this discussion around Goal 8. We had to work out further, but in the end, the countries had already agreed on a certain set of indicators. Going back, I come back to the ICLS because International Conference of Labor Statisticians. I told you that it's our global standard setting mechanism for these indicators, and all these frameworks and even systems have been discussed intensively. For us, the UN Statistical Commission, it's not our main counterpart in setting standards, although we work closely and we report to the Commission afterwards and we get the Commission on board. But frankly, our standard setting is quite independent, but it is hosted by the ILO, but it's a tripartite thing that it's not ILO's property. It's the labor statistician community. And this divide between labor statistician and labor and national accountants, I think This was very clear that this was existing in the early stages, but nowadays, if you attend the different discussions, clearly the boundaries are blurred, and we have clearly a lot of dialogue. We are part of the working group on national accounts and the revision of national accounts now, and the group of national accounts is part of our tripartite meeting of experts that is leading the new resolution, for instance, of informality. So why? Because we want to align. We have already started this in 2013, and we are still now in this process. We meet once every 5 years, but this is a process. It's not a conference. A conference is only the benchmark, because it's the moment that we adopt or not the resolution. But the key issue is that it's a process that lasts 5 years of discussions and consultations and of agreement on new standards. If we can go to the next slide. There, for instance, just an example. There are main ICLS resolutions that have clearly impact in the Beyond GDP. One, it's the framework of work that has been adopted in the 19 ICLS in 2013. This clearly, it's I would say, very groundbreaking for labor statisticians, because in the end, this framework, it's the first time that adopts, I would say, a definition of work instead of only work in unemployment. It's the first time that unpaid work is acknowledged and visible and quantified. It's the first time that the own use production work of services are included in work, and the volunteer work in services are included in work. And employment has been very narrowed into work for pay or profit, but the unpaid work has been highlighted in terms of unpaid compulsory work, unpaid trainee work, volunteer work, and even the own use work, production work for final use. So this, of course, if you see, although it's, I don't know why it doesn't show, but there is the SNA labor input, it's part of it, it's a subset of this, but the work framework is broader than this. Just an example that now the countries are implementing, I would say widely, they have facilitated policy making in many aspects, and it has clearly impact in the compatibility between the production boundary of the SNA and what can be captured in labor force surveys and in labor accounts. Why? Because we wanted that. We wanted to go towards a more compatible definition between what is the labor issue, or what labor statisticians have always measured, and what SNA is trying to deliver. And I think I welcome the new SNA, where informality will be particularly embedded. The unpaid work, particularly on services, will be visible. And we have just heard informality will be also part of the discussions, and it's part of the issues that we are going to have. So this clearly, it's more aligned to that. It will be created more synergies between these. And of course, we come back to the accounts and to the tables. This is clearly, in our case, the decent work indicator and framework doesn't take into account any table. Why? Because this the closing between one side of the table and the other one, in our case, is almost impossible because of the myriad of different sources and the different degrees of availability of data. However, at the national level, we can provide more information to have the calculations for modeling and to try to be transparent in this modeling, as Stephen was mentioning, and trying to get inputs for national accountants. And this has been the case, particularly in many of the discussions that were taking place. Just in the end, in the last slide, please. We have to keep pace with the changes. and the changes are there. If we can go, that's it. And the changes are there, although in the 13 ICLS, as Ivo was referring in one of my previous meetings with Ivo, that in the 13 ICLS, there was some clarity provided on some variables on economic active population, employment, participation. The 19 ICLS and the 20th ICLS in 2013 and 18 were advancing much more, I would say, radically. And in 2013, there was the adoption of the new framework of work statistics and underutilization, the one that I just mentioned. In the 2018, we have the new resolution on work relationships, because work has changed a lot, and we have to include the new forms of work that are emerging, platform workers, gig economy, many things. And finally, on this ICLS, we are going to have new standards on informality. These are the main variables that will feed this system, and clearly has links with the Beyond GDP, which is what we were aiming from the very beginning. Just summing up, I don't want to be extended because I have been too wordy. Again, I think the interrelationship, we are heading internally in the ILO towards a metrics on measuring social justice. This will be an alliance that is sought with the rest of the UN system. We are in the initial steps, but I am envisaging that this system of social and demographic statistics will be very welcome, particularly because work is not a bubble, as Stephen was mentioning, and we had to outreach other areas of social statistics and even economic statistics to ask to provide better metrics for policymakers, particularly to find fiscal space, to make our point, etc., and to provide these answers to these topical issues that we have now on clearly the discussion, even having a new social contract, that this is what we are hearing every day in the news, and all the turmoil that we are seeing everywhere. It's because of that. And I think work is in the center of the uneasiness, and I think we have to address these issues with interrelations. Thanks a lot, Francesca.
Thank you so much, Rafael. You know, I will just listen to you for hours. You have so much to tell us. Thanks for going back also with the historical overview of the work of ILO and CLS. Too much to summarize, but definitely the last point that you mentioned, that even the framework for decent work indicators that was not conceived to move towards these account solutions, because it was more developed and fed into the SDGs type of policy indicator frameworks, could eventually be fed at the national level for the production, could be transformed or could be used for the production of accounts at the national level if proper guidelines were provided to countries on how to model some of the cells where we need to impute, and instructions were given to national accountants. So it's also still in the hands of national accountants. I think we need to create also a new profession, a new profile, where you get the national accountants that are also social statisticians. And for that, it's probably your profiles, people working on labor statistics that can really make the bridge between the economic statistics pillar and the social and demographic statistics pillar. And as you know, when the three of us are in the same room, me, you, and Ivo, I think Ivo and myself, we understand better each other. So we need Rafael's type to use the same terminology, or to translate the terminology that we are using in the two different communities. But we are running a little late. Let me immediately give the floor to our colleague, Oliver Chingania, who is the director of the African Center for Statistics at the Economic Commission for Africa. And Oliver will give us the perspective of the African region and the UN ECA Statistical Office. Oliver, you have the floor.
Thank you, Francisca. I hope you're able to hear me and you can see the slide.
Perfect.
Thank you. Yeah, no, very quickly. First of all, I am happy to be here to be part of this conversation right at the beginning of the sprint. I think a lot of the stuff that I'm going to say have to a very large extent, when you give the history of travel from the beginning, and also what was also discussed by Ivo, is going to be in my presentation. So they might sound a little bit of repetitive, but I hope I'll try to be a bit specific to the continent. So I'm going to talk about, first of all, the initiatives that led to the production of population and social statistics, and then we'll talk about a little bit about the evolution itself by developing the frameworks, and then what role ECA is playing to facilitate the development and production of social statistics.
Sorry, Oliver. Sorry, apologies. I don't like to interrupt. We don't see the slides moving, and you are not in PowerPoint mode.
I'm on the outline. I'm on the outline. Are you able to see the presentation outline?
No, you are not in PowerPoint presentation mode. You need to maybe click.
I did. Let me see. I thought I shared. In fact, I have shared. I thought that's what I did. Okay. Okay. Let me start it up again. I'll stop sharing, and then let me know if you're able to see it.
Okay.
Let me go to try again. Let me see if we're able to. So I'm gonna share. Can you see it now?
Let's see. It's the same. Try to put it in presentation mode.
It's actually okay. Let me try one more time.
From the beginning.
From the beginning, yes. I'm going to go from the beginning. So I'm from the beginning. That's where I am right from the beginning. Yeah. Are you able to see it now?
No. I mean, we see the slides, but they don't move, and you are not in presentation mode. Benson, maybe Benson can help? No. I mean, we see your screen, but they are not moving. Benson, can you maybe take over, and then Oliver will just tell us when to change slide?
Are you able to see it now?
Yeah, but we see them, and that will be fine. But now it works.
Okay.
Perfect.
Good. So what slide are you seeing? I just want to be sure you're seeing the right slide.
Oops, no, now we went back to the other view where we see your screen, but you are not in presentation mode. Oliver, can I propose that we take over just for the sake of time? And I'm sure that Benson can help. Just tell him when to click.
Not a problem.
Thank you. Apologies.
Okay. I'm not sure exactly what was happening, but I thought I shared. So do you want not to? Okay, that's fine. So are you okay now? Can I proceed?
Yes. Now you are on your. Maybe go back. Yeah, you are on your first slide. So maybe click once, Benson. So we go into the.
Let's go
overview.
To the outline. Yeah. So I was on the third bullet point, and I was saying that I was going to talk about the role of ECA in facilitating the production of social statistics. And then I want to talk about the integration of society, the economy, and well-being, and finally just talk about the challenges that we have in the African statistical system, and then finally talk about the way forward. So next slide, please. So as mentioned already by Francisca, and also to a large extent by Ivo, there's been several initiatives that we built into the, building onto demographic and social statistics. First of all, the World Fertility itself in the early 70s, where there was an undertaking that allowed a lot of data that was collected to inform, demographic data. Then, of course, you have the African National Household Survey Capability Program that also was linked to what was already mentioned by colleagues. Then, of course, the DHS surveys in the 80s. Run by USAID and others that were able to support the production of statistics. And of course, in the mid-90s and many other surveys that we saw around the multi-indicator cluster surveys, again, really built around producing several data that is required to inform both the social demographic surveys, data rather. But beyond that, really, if you look at the Africa at that time, Africa is basically, if you look at post-independence, you're talking about something like 60, 65 years of independence. There was a lot of age at the beginning to really collect data through the censuses, and some of it you sort of talked about it. But if I concentrate just looking at the 1990 round of census, where 44 countries participated, again, a lot of data was curated from there. The 2000 round of census, 38 countries in 2010, 47, and this time around we have roughly about 44. We hopefully that maybe by next year that number can actually increase when the round, the 2020 round, is ended. Next slide, please. So, in between there, as I've already mentioned, before 2000. At independence itself, as I mentioned, there was a lot of need for sort of data that's required for planning. And then, countries embarked on data collection to inform various processes. First of all, their own national development plan, but later on in the 1990s was the poverty reduction strategy papers that were being produced that also demanded a lot of data, and a lot of it was from the social side. In the 2000, which you already talked about, was the MDGs. Again, another facilitator, another drive that would really attract a lot of data from the population and demographic data. And later on in 2015 on the Sustainable Development Goals, again, another area where there was a lot of demand for data coming from the demographic and social sectors. Next slide, please. Now, on the continent, as you know, one of the things that we also deal with the Agenda 2063, which is the Africa we want. And this was developed just a few years before the actually Agenda 2030. And I shanted to say that perhaps maybe SDGs were actually derived or collected a lot of information that was initiative that was already thought through from the Agenda 2063. And this is the future that we want. So again, these on the continent have been able to facilitate the data collection or the production of data for demographic and social statistics to inform these agendas, but also the national development plans and also the regional strategies that are developed at regional level. The next slide, please. Now, to do this, I think ourselves at ECA, we have been part of the process from the time ECA was set up in 1958, and up to now, we maintain a database we call the ECS database, which also includes not just the economic statistics, but also data on population and social statistics. We also, within that, in that database, we also maintain a dashboard for tracking progress on SDGs, but also for Agenda 2063, because these are linked, quite linked. About 70% of what in the Agenda 63 is actually what is in the SDGs. So one of the things we have also done at ECA, we have developed tools that allow the measurement of alignment levels of development, the frameworks to national development plans to ensure that there's no fatigue, in terms of the production of data that is required in the National Statistical Office, but also to ensure consistency in the production of data. And in this also that, given that there's been several other programs being run by partners, some of them by countries. Also, those have been able to facilitate data required. For instance, the DHS, which I've already mentioned, the MIX, the living monitoring, standard living surveys, and many others that have been able to produce various data. But also, they've been able to help us improve the methodology in the production of the social statistics. Next slide, please. Now, what has been the role of ECA in all this? First of all, our role really has been, strengthening the national statistical system in countries to be able to produce and disseminate to a very large extent disaggregate data and statistics with a gender perspective. That has been part of our really a lot to make sure the countries are able to produce that, and also that they're able to maintain the standards according to international accepted requirements. The second part is also we've been able to help improve the availability of harmonized data and statistics to enhance the production and dissemination to ensure there's comparability of data across the countries, but also to ensure that it fits into the global standing requirements. And thirdly, also to be able to support the production and the use of geospatial data and allow that integration between geospatial and statistics itself. And fourthly, we've been able to contribute to setting up of undertaking of sensors. I mean, the current round of sensors this year has been really at the core of production and running of the sensors activities in countries. And finally, we've been able to support the implementation of the modern data collection practices using the modern communication technologies and tools that are available. And we've seen that in the sensors, but also in many other areas in CRVS, Consumer Price Index, and others, where we have been using these various type of methods. Next slide, please. Now, coming back to the issue of economic, or rather the well-being that is being discussed and where we should be going to. A lot of the indicators that have been used on the continent, which are basically the socio-economic well-being indicators, are around the poverty and inequality measures, mainly at the Gini index, as well as the wealth in quintile. We got data around unemployment and as well as underemployment levels, the multi-dimensional poverty, access to markets and to bank systems, and of course the SDGs and MGDs themselves. However, there hasn't been, all these have been done, of course, with a lot of breakdowns, but there have also been a lot of challenges around that in terms of what we've not been able to do. One of them is, the lifelong trajectories in accumulation of human capital, the vulnerability and social security, in particular the informal social security systems, and the impact of wars, as you know, and terrorism on actual well-being. Has some of these things that have really impacted in measuring or having better data around socio-economic well-being on the continent. Next slide, please. Now, in terms of what is being proposed now, which is the systems of population and social statistics, accounting, if you like, there are issues there. First of all, this would require numerous and regular surveys, to be able to collect the data that is required, particularly for the new data that's coming up, the emerging data, and the methodologies that are being made available. That will be a problem. And this is why on the continent, a lot of it, we've been using the social accounting matrix, because the requirement of data is much lower compared to the SPSA. However, one of the issues that we see as a problematic here is the issues of integrating all these issues: the human capital and migration, the environmental concerns, and the social security systems that are available would be some of the challenges if we were to adapt these situations. But notwithstanding, I think with time we should be able to adapt. But bearing in mind that there will be all these challenges that we will be facing in the process. Now, there are, next slide, please. There are also challenges in what we envisage as challenges, first of all, in the well-being on the continent. First of all, I think I must put a disclaimer here that in this particular area, there's not much that has taken place in terms of developing the methodology that is required to measure well-being on the continent. I think the way we see things is that, from the African perspective, this is usually defined with the framework of group norms, values, and kinship relations, and ties rooted to cultural issues. And that also would be actually quite a challenge. And of course, the country comparison of well-being may also be incorrect to a very large extent, and may be wrongly generalized if cultural realities are neglected in defining factors that contribute to the well-being on the continent. And then finally also is we need to take note of the challenges of the social statistics, for instance, that were highlighted in the 1970s, which are still existent even now, and that created quite a problem. And that when you start beginning to look at the definition of well-being, that may be a bit problematic in terms of how you apply that to the African setting going forward. In terms of the next slide, please. In terms of the challenges, I think there are quite a number of challenges, but just to enumerate a few of them is for instance, the irregular data monitoring for some of the frameworks. For instance, the SDG 8, 13, and 16, which leads to really the quality of life this is quite a big challenge. The lack of the yardstick to be able to monitor the progress in the development within Africa and the global south in particular, also that is a challenge that affects the system. Inadequate capacity in terms of resources and absence, to some extent, absence of the clear planning arrangement, and also the alignment of these plans to the budgeting processes that create a problem as well. You know, if you don't have the alignment of the resources required from the NSDS to the National Development Plan and to the budget itself, that creates a big challenge. Now, what's the way forward in terms of action? And first of all, I think as you recall, during the UNSC in March this year, we did present the roadmap on the transformation and modernizing of statistical system on the continent, which is going to be using these innovative approaches, if you like, non-traditional ways of collecting data and analysis. I think that is one way that we think that we'll begin to address, perhaps also provide information that's required for the well-being. But in terms of areas of focus, really, I think is to conduct research and development strategies to meet the challenges in monitoring this beyond the development of beyond 2030, improve the way we collect data for administrative data, particularly. I think there's a little bit of struggle there, but I think there are strides of areas where we are trying to see how we can actually move to data that's required for administrative data. And of course, provision of technical support in developing new approaches, in the use of the information and communication technology in data collection, and of course, support the development of the national target indicators and the methods that are required. So overall, really, in the last slide, which is as I conclude, I want to state that I think, last slide, please. I want to state that I think that as a continent, there is an opportunity to really collect and analyze data at a granular level, which is timely for social and demographic issues that are being addressed, but also to have this integration that is required with economics as well as environmental issues that would address the well-being. I would end there. Thank you very much, Francisca.
Thank you, Oliver, and you were also very good with timing. Again, apologies, we are running late, but this discussion is so important, and we had so many great speakers. I hope you'll stay with us for another 10 or 15 minutes. We are happy to open the floor. Of course, there were so many presenters. It will be maybe difficult for you to get back to the beginning at 7 this morning, but feel free to ask any questions or to provide feedback on all the issues that have been discussed so far. You can raise your hand. Yeah, thank you. Please, Aldo, do you want to introduce yourself? Aldo Femia.
Well, hi, thanks a lot. I'm glad there is some space for discussion. I work at the Italian National Statistical Office, ISTAT, thanks to the speaker who mentioned it and our first president, Jeannie. And I've been taking part to the SNA revision as an environmental accountant. So on the subtask theme, environmental accounting in the well-being and sustainability. Well, my position was a bit out of the mainstream, because I think the current, many of the current and most of the environmental accounting changes being introduced in the SNA do not really reflect a beyond GDP vision. We are talking about going beyond GDP, and actually are an attempt to kind of revive monetary measures and have them say more than they can, whilst probably a quite expensive attempt, because it would cost a lot to try and make certain estimates. Whilst the wisest thing to do would probably be just accept that there are some limits and that the SNA is meant to measure the economy, and that we must be clear on what the economy is. But we are kind of blurring things and introducing elements of measuring utility in an economic neoclassical sense. And in the end, blurring the meaning. I mean, I could give examples. I had prepared some, but of course, there's no time. So just to give this very broad interpretation of the process. Thank you.
Thank you, Aldo. I see Catherine is ready to to respond or to add her views. Let's see, Catherine, if there are any other questions. I'm sure that there will be more for you too. Anybody else? No? Well, Catherine, please go ahead.
Thanks a lot, Aldo, for raising these issues. I know we had a lot of very spirited discussions in the task team, and there was no consensus on certain issues in terms of how they should be treated in SNA space. But I guess for this forum, I'd like to kind of make the general point that I think our objective in the environmental economic accounting team was to look at in certain cases where SNA standards could be harmonized with the standards in the system of environmental economic accounts, the SEA, to ensure that those two systems could be connected. So we weren't attempting to sort of overtake the entire measurement sphere of the SEA, which is intended to have an environmental lens and appropriately has an environmental lens, but we were attempting to clarify the connections and to increase where appropriate the kind of the appropriateness of the SNA standards to measuring the environment. So Jorrit, for example, talked about areas where we've increased the classifications in order to make these elements more visible, and in very selected cases where we've increased the asset boundary or clarified the asset boundary. So a really good example is renewable energy, where we have added a new asset for the contribution of nature, which would allow us to look at trade-offs between, for example, the fossil fuels and the renewable sector, which is extremely important from a policy perspective. But I think the more technical discussions are probably better for another forum than for this broader one, where we're looking at these bigger questions about what are the requirements for social statistics beyond GDP. But thanks for the opportunity.
You're on mute,
Sorry,
Francesca.
I'm muted. Big mistake. I wanted to thank you, Catherine, and I also want to remind everyone that this is just the first of a series of sprints. We are planning 7 sprints, so you'll receive many more invites to participate and follow the discussion. So there will be other opportunities for us to dig in also on these thematics. Maybe let me acknowledge Najwa, I don't know how to pronounce your name, if you can introduce yourself and come in with your questions or comments.
Thank you for giving me the floor. Thank you very much for the very interesting discussions that have been going in this session. My name is Najwa Yaqub. I'm the director of the Statistical Center of Ras Al Khaimah, which is one of the Emirates of the United Arab Emirates, one of the Emirates that's northern to Dubai. I've been working in economic statistics for a while in national accounts, and for several years I've been also heading the social statistics surveys. So I have a both view on both sides, the national accounts aspect and the social statistics aspect. I have to give a point of view from someone working in developing countries in terms of statistics. What have been presented in the SNA development, for example, I would give just an example on measuring the depletion and producing not GDP, but more net values, not gross values. All this requires statistical systems to be able to collect data that would allow for this. In the developing countries, there are many countries still struggling to produce accurate GDP measures. They are still in the production approach. They haven't gone beyond. So if we want really to go beyond GDP in measuring well-being, it cannot be only through the national accounts systems that are very sophisticated and could not be implemented in developing countries and need lots of resources in terms of data collection that are unfortunately not available, and leads expertise in national accounts that's lacking in this region of the world. I'm not talking from only United Arab Emirates. I'm talking also from my background. I've been working for 20 years in Lebanon. So adding these two, it's very difficult to continue focusing on only what the colleague from ISTAT mentioned on monetary values for the beyond GDP. The beyond GDP is much, much larger. What has been presented in terms of measures of labor indicators, there are many dimensions that could be at a lower cost collected through social surveys that would give an idea about the well-being of households at a lower cost, at an easier way, defining some additional indicators. Many of them are already in the SDGs, would allow to assess the well-being of households through indicators, not these big framework that are very nice, but requires lots of resources that unfortunately are lacking in many developing countries. I mean, this is what I wanted to highlight. I'm not saying what you've done is great, is amazing, is very useful, but it would apply to developing, very developed statistical systems. It wouldn't be applied in developing countries. So that's why we need to keep focus on social statistics, social surveys that can produce at much lower cost. As we've seen with the colleague from Africa, there are many surveys, household surveys that are run on regular basis, producing indicators for SDG that we can still build on these, invest a little bit more in new indicators, on labor force surveys that are implemented all over the world, add to them some modules to be able to measure the well-being, not only focus on the SNA as a framework. With all, I don't want to be longer, I know we're late on time, but again, thank you very much for giving me the floor to voice the frustrations of the developing countries in terms of statistical resources available. Thank you, and I look forward to attend the coming meetings on this.
Thank you so much. And Najwa, you actually touched on the core of the discussion that we are opening with these mixed groups, right? We have the social and demographers in the room. There is not just me, there are many other of my colleagues, and there are the national accountants, there are some economists. So the point of this sprint is to bridge the different communities and try to understand each other. Of course, my side is much more similar to what you are describing. And that's why in my presentation I was pointing out that this discussion of a rigid system versus a set of indicators has been going on at the Statistical Commission for more than 70 years when we are trying to measure people well-being. I'm not talking about the measuring the wealth, the economic side and economic wealth of a country, economic health of a country. So, but we are, I think, ready to wrap up. I don't know, Ivo, where you are. If you wanted to come in now, I see that there is another question or comments. But Ivo, please open up your screen so that I know how you want to wrap up.
No, I think wrapping this up would be almost impossible. So we should begin an attempt.
There's one more hand. So if
yeah.
Okay, Francesca, back to you.
Yeah.
Please.
Okay, Rajiv Kumar.
Yes, I thought I will be missed. I am Rajiv Kumar, working as a director in National Account for compilation of national accounts in NSO India. So I wanted to comment on, because a lot of alternative data sources has come up, and they are really, I mean, big and influential data sources for our societies. And they are not really compatible with the definition and the standards of SNA or any of the standards that UN has made till now. They are bypassing the standards developed till now. And these data are mostly individual based. So I would like to hear from somebody that why we are still sticking to the household as a primary or basic unit of compilation, because when we go into the distributional accounts, then between household transaction we should be, I mean, make an impact. which is not that important for sectoral accounts, because between household transactions does not make much of a going from one household to another. For example, all of the financial transactions are there in digital form at one place or other, and that is a very individual driven data storage framework. So why still we are not, in any case, the old definition of household has blurred to a great extent in modern times. So people are maybe living but not sharing the food because everybody is having their own arrangement of food in kind of. So there is a blur in the old definition of household. So if I can hear some perspective that why we are still keeping the household as the basic level of data collection.
Thank you. Thank you, Rajiv. I don't know if anybody wants to have a very short answer for Rajiv, and then maybe Ivo, you pick up. I mean, we can conclude together if you want.
I can react to Rajiv. I think he raises a very pertinent question. So when we look at economic activity, we look at households as a unit of decision making, and that can own assets and hold liabilities and undertake production, right? But if we talk about living conditions, social concerns, we have to look at individuals, and that's not the domain of economic activity. That's and the SNA. That's the domain of social demographic statistics. So there is a huge contribution that, you know, when we think about the framework, system, whatever we're going to call it, on social demographic statistics, and clearly define that it is a people-centered concept that we're after and that we want to measure, then exactly we are talking about the domain as, you know, that we want to imply. So that needs information on individuals, and there are, of course, instruments to do that, to actually collect information on these individuals. So that's also that we have to then reflect into that system/framework as we move forward on it, because that's actually what we measured. But I think, Rajiv, you hit the crux of the matter. Now, individuals move into families and they move into households. So we have to explain the dynamic of family formation and household formation. That is very important, which is also have to be explained by the system, and we can do that. How you do that through marriage, through other associations and relationship. I think for the global south, we have to do this in kinships, right? So also there is a whole discussion that, you know, which is very important, which has been reflected by our colleagues from the United Emirates, but also by Oliver, is that we have to very much look at these concepts of well-being, social concern in terms of the global south. So Francesca and the whole group that works on this has to get the global south very strongly involved in this. So that's a major sort of driver of our work and our discussion. And this is one element of that discussion to bring that all into play. But thank you, Rajiv, very much so. Shall I move to conclusion, Francesca? And well, as I said, we will not conclude. What Francesca and I will promise, together with Benson, is that we will provide you a summary of this discussion. And of course, you have the recording. And we will diligently bring that together in a short document. So at least it is document what we achieved today. I would like to thank, I think, Francesca, you will do that with me. The speakers, I think, Stefan, thank you very much for chairing and being there. I know you had to go because you have a meeting with the senior management at the moment. But also I would like to thank Catherine and Jorrit. I would like to thank Rafael Diaz de Medina and Steve McFeely and Oliver Singanga. I think we gave a great first start of a broader discussion, Francesca, that you also take forward under the Friends of the Chair. You have the aspiration of bringing this sort of processes much more closer together. We will work on that so that we can bring that much more closer together. I think it should be a discussion that we have to take forward, and we will take it forward in more detail. We try to give some direction of travel that we want to do in exploring maybe the system/framework. And I think what we are hearing, it has to be flexible. It cannot be a rigid system. It has to be a flexible system that also explains more clearly how you derive indicators and statistics should be part of it. It should be say something about the integrated data collection instrument. Oliver indicated that, but also how we bring this all together in a nice framework that we can all live and aspire to implement in a flexible way. SNA is also flexible. You can take different modules. SIA is very flexible. If water is important, you take water. If energy is important, you take energy. So we have to develop a system that has modules. We call it subsystems, and people can move forward in their own direction of travel linked to policy making. I thought it was very valuable. Francesca, you close with your last words, and we will look forward to the next meeting. Benson, maybe you can remind us when is the next meeting, or maybe Richard would like to indicate so that people are aware on their agenda. Francesca, I move back to you.
Yes, thank you. I just want to conclude by saying that this is only the beginning of a journey that we have started all together. Again, I want to acknowledge that it's probably the first time that we have the different communities in the same space, in the same forum, in the same sets of meetings. And we need to be patient with each other. We are using different terms, so sometimes we need a translator. You all talk about capitals, we don't talk about capitals, but believe me, we will find a mid-ground when immediately we will understand each other, knowing that we have a lot of common topics, common challenges, but again, maybe we are looking at them from a different angle. So this is definitely a success for the series of sprints in bringing the different communities together and in trying to move together towards the same direction as we want. We all share this goal of improving social and demographic statistics, helping us in better organizing this very vast and fragmented area of official statistics, people-centered, and also as we strive to better make the connections between the social and demographic statistics field and the economic field as a start and the environmental statistics field later on. So I want to thank you all. Richard or Benson, I believe our next discussion is coming up soon, the next meeting.
Our next discussion will be on the 15th of June. It will start 1 hour later. So slightly late, not as early in the morning for those of you in the States. Anu Peltola from UNCTAD will talk about valuing what counts. Rutger Hoekstra is going to talk about his work on bringing together beyond GDP measures. Jonathan Barth from the Zoe Institute is going to bring us up to date with European perspective. Gerard Edding from the Netherlands is going to talk about the importance of here and now, the future and elsewhere. Kiana Taylor from the ONS is going to bring us up to date on work around the capitals. And Graciela Marquez from INIGI will be talking to us about the ability of middle-income countries to use the existing suite of well-being measures. I hope there's something there for everyone and look forward to seeing you all there. Back to you, Francesca. Thank you.
Thank you. So again, please join us. There will be much more discussions on indicators versus systems and how we can all agree on what to bring as a viable complementary measure or set of measures to GDP as we strive to measure inclusive and sustainable well-being. So with that, I thank you again, all of you, the great speakers. It was a fantastic experience. 3 hours together. We need 3 days in a room to understand each other. But again, a big thank you from wherever you are. Oliver, Rafael, Steve, Catherine, Ivo, Richard, Benson. Thank you again, everyone. We'll see you in a couple of weeks. Bye.
I thank you.